Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Cup Editorial. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am the associate producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and today I am joined by two of my amazing friends and colleagues. They're old hats around here, LOL. Mackenzie Horner and Ryan Borochovitz are co-artistic producers of Cup of Hemlock Theatre. And in today's episode, as you noticed, it's the Cup Editorial. And today we're going to be unpacking the subject of audience etiquette. So we're just going to be chatting about it. We have a list of questions, but these editorial episodes are kind of meant to be unscripted and casual conversations. What's really lovely about the Golden Trio of Cup of Hemlock today is I feel for this specific topic, we're all coming from varying sides of the industry in experience and opinion. As our viewers and listeners know, I am an actor myself, so my relationship to the audience in the theater is always the audience is that extra cast member with me, whether I like it or not. Every one of us here, we've seen a lot of different types of theater. I would say, Mackenzie, you probably have seen the most commercial theater or higher tiered performances of the three of us.
Yes.
As we all know, Ryan and I frequent a lot of indie houses as well as commercial too. So there is a massive amount of sort of opinion and experience we're going to bring to the table. And there has been a lot of media coverage on audience etiquette with a lot of stars in the industry right now, and also the topic of audience etiquette post-pandemic and during pandemic and how that's sort of changed and evolved. There's a lot to get into with audience etiquette, and we're going to do it all today. But before we advance too much further, we've got to do our usual cup icebreaker. So Mack, I will have you start us off this evening. How are you? What is in your cup? And as a little extra icebreaker, what is your favorite seat? If you're going to a large theater house, where do you like to sit in the audience and why?
Fair. Well, I mean, to start with, I'm doing very well. It is a Friday night. I am actually heading out to a Broadway rave after this recording, so Mack doesn't go to clubs, but this is the one time he is going to venture out into this weird, wacky world to meet some theater folks. So it should be fun. So, but tonight I have my cup of tea in the cup because I've been on the phones all day. And also joining me is my glass of Crystal Light.
Amazing.
So to answer your question, where does Mack like to sit? It depends on what I'm doing. So if I am seeing like just a regular Mervish musical like Liz or a Joseph, I like my orchestra seats. I like being up close to the front, like front of the orchestra. One of my all-time favorite memories is when my dad and I went and saw the Phantom of the Opera, and we were up close, like 6 rows from the front. We had the chandelier swoop over top of us when the Phantom sent off the pyrotechnics. You could feel the heat coming off them. Like, it was just fun. But if I'm going to see a film in concert, which I do like to do, I have found that I have done orchestra seating, but you don't get a good view of the full orchestra. So I do like the balconies for that, because then you get a nice overhead view. Like, I just went and saw the Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring in concert. And fun fact, apparently there's an accordion player who plays part of the Shire theme. Did not know that until Andrew, one of our wonderful panelists, came with me, and we were looking at each other as we're watching the show and went, there's an accordion player who was playing the Shire theme. And then after intermission, he disappeared and pulled a Fontaine and never came back after intermission, because I guess they were done with the Shire theme. We're like, you can go home now. But that's the fun thing where, like, if you're sitting from the front audience perspective, you don't get that full view of what the orchestra is up to. So when you're going to experience an orchestra, I would say go for the balcony, because it gives you a better viewpoint of what everybody in the orchestra is doing. If you're going for just a straight theatrical experience, I like being head on, nice and close in the orchestra. But that's just
amazing.
Ryan, Jill, what about you guys? How are you? What's in your cups?
Yes. Popcorning around. Ryan, take it away.
Hi, I'm doing well. Good to be here. Happy to talk about this topic that I didn't realize I had such strong opinions about until we started discussing doing this episode. So I'm happy to.
You should have heard the prep
the
time
Kraken.
Ryan and I did on this one.
Yes, we had a lot of thoughts. But yes, I'm excited to unleash the Kraken of how I feel about the subject. But yeah, I'm drinking coffee and also the cup. Yeah, there it is, Cup of Hemlock. That's our show. And yes, where do I like to sit? So naturally, I like to be like a 17th century king and sit right up on the stage so everybody can see that I am attending the theater. No, that is a lie.
Absolutely not you.
No, I like to hide. I like to hide in the back. Truth be told, I have a funny quirk when it is general admission and I'm deciding where to sit. I do like to take a place that I think may have been a neglected sightline to basically test the director to see, did they account for this might be not the most ideal place for an audience member to sit? Have they accounted for my experience if I choose to sit there? And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I guess I'm punishing myself for choosing to sit there when I actually don't get the best sightlines. But
so does that mean when you go to Stratford, Ryan, you choose the back of the thrust stage in the festival?
When I go to Stratford, I choose the cheapest tickets I can get. That also does kind of influence my decision too. I do see a lot of theater and I try to, maximize or economize how many tickets I'm able to buy by maybe not always taking the best seats. But I think, people are paying for tickets regardless of where they sit. So directors should be taking into account the varying locations that people have in the audience. And I also, yes, I am a shy person, so to speak. So I do, contrary to the joke that I just made at the beginning, I usually will position myself far off to the side because I don't want to be in people's way. I'd rather kind of be off to the side. And sometimes those are the worst sight lines. So best of both with both of these rationales. How about you, Jill?
Nice. I love this. We're getting so many different angles as to this side.
So many sight lines.
So many sight lines into this added cast member inside the theatrical experience. Yes, hello. I'm also doing well. I'm feeling very energized today. So I'm really excited to unpack all of our questions and dig deep and referee if I have to. I am drinking Earl Grey tea today. It's snowing quite hard while we are recording this, so it felt like a warm tea day. And we've seen this mug, those of you who are watching on the cup multiple times, but this is the mug where it's my fun ant mug. So it has a little just brown horse chilling out, and then it has a unicorn going wild on a stripper pole. That is me. I am the imagination, fun, charismatic ant, and this is other ants. But why I chose this today is because I feel like these are different audience members, or the way different shows can maybe ask their audiences to act or react. So that is that. In regards to where I like to sit, if I have a choice in a large house, I think I want to say, regardless of what I'm seeing, because I do pick up what you're putting down, Mack, of seeing the orchestra, if it is a symphony show. Ryan, I love this pick to test the director, pick the kind of let's sit behind the pillar and see what I can and can't see and what does it mean. But I want to say usually middle orchestra, anywhere from I want to say row G to row T. That's where I think I would sit, because to me, this is coming from me entering the experience as an audience member, but unfortunately, sometimes consuming theater as an actor. I also naturally kind of like to go to the theater and not only observe as an audience member, but observe peers and colleagues, how they tackle a role or tell the story. So I find with this sort of halfway and on the ground level, I'm able to see the whole show as a scenic spectacle in its entirety, but I'm still close enough to kind of hone in on gestures and facial reactions. So I can kind of choose to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show per se, or I can minutely go in, kind of see how people are reacting. I feel like with the balcony, that's a little bit harder to do, to get those intimate moments, because you are kind of forced to only capture everything as an aerial view. Balcony is obviously awesome for rock musicals or jukebox musicals, because you're rocking out. It's a concert kind of vibe anyways. I
Mhm.
know Ryan and I, we were in the balcony for Anne Juliet, and that was a freaking bop and a half.
I was also in the balcony when you played Maureen in Rent, and it felt like when you did Over the Moon, you were projecting it right to me at the top of there.
Right.
So that was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. But then something was super neat. Like Ryan and I, we saw Fall on Your Knees at Can Stage recently, and both parts, part 1 and part 2, we were sitting very close to the audience. I think we were like the 3rd row from the apron of the
Ooh.
stage. And so that was lovely, again, to see those intimate moments. But there were some larger pictures of that show that I do wish, if we were a little bit farther in Blue Lapel Theater, like farther back, we would have been able to kind of snapshot a different vibe. So I think there's more pros and cons to being upfront and up above. So I'm going to keep this middle ground option to catch all the experience.
Love that.
All right. So with those wonderful insights and intros off the top, let's dive in. So our first sort of unscripted question is, what does audience etiquette look like to you? So Mack, this editorial topic was kind of like your original baby project. So
Yes, it
I'll have
was.
you open up the floor.
Yes. Do you want me to say where I got this inspiration from for this? Or do you
Yeah,
want me to-
sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Give us the background. Catch us up.
Yeah. So I went and saw a play. Where is it? Here you have it on my desk. Yes, here we go. I went and saw The Shark is Broken at Mirvish. A wonderful 90-minute, I mean, a little bit repetitive at times, but it's a fun play basically into like going through the actor's experience as they were filming Jaws. So you have Roy Schneider, I forget the actor who plays Quint, and Richard Dreyfuss.
Robert Shaw.
Robert Shaw, thank you. So you have Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, and Roy Schneider, all his characters on this boat-like set, and it's like a 90-minute, no intermission, straight through play. So I got a rush seat ticket. I was about 8 rows from the front at the Royal Alex. I showed up in good time. I actually had a drink at the bar. I did my thing. Went to the theater 10 minutes before the show started. I turned my phone off, read the program, and audience files in around me. I start watching the show. Now, within 90 minutes, I had a group of 4 people on my one side with the gentleman sitting next to me every 10 minutes checking his stocks on his phone. Then about 30 minutes before the show ends, the whole group of them get up and leave, but they have to crawl over me to get out. And then on my other side, I have a couple who shows up late, then decides to pop gum. Then for some reason, they must have had, like, I don't know what was going on with their bladders, but one of them got up, one of them sat down, one of them got up, one of them sat down. Then the girl next to me puts her feet on the chairs in front of her, and then we have people like 2 rows from the front, literally getting up, leaving, going to the washroom, and then coming back and having to get back into their seats. And to be honest, I was mad. I was really pissed because I was like, how is it we cannot sit for 90 minutes as a society and give our unfocused attention to this, but we can sit for 3+ hours and watch an Avengers movie at the Cineplex. It was just infuriating. So I came out of that, and I think I met you guys later on, a few days later. I told you about this experience about how, and because the play wasn't like a 10 out of 10, you could easily get distracted by these other people. Now, if the show was really gripping like a Doubt, you don't notice the other people around you doing other stuff because you're so focused on the story. But because it was a bit of a waiting for Godot or waiting for the shark story, like a lot of scenes are kind of similar after a while. So I can get why audiences would get a little antsy. But it's like, it's 90 minutes, people. Sit down, turn off your phone, give these 3 actors who are on stage basically the entire time your undivided attention. You paid you pay good money. Like, I don't think they all were rush seat ticket people. So you all paid, so the majority of the audience paid good money to be there, and you're not getting your money's worth. So anyway, so that's what inspired this topic, and then I did more reading, and we'll get into more topics about that have come up about this as well, that I've sent to Ryan and Jill. So eventually Ryan and Jill went, maybe we should do an editorial on this, because I feel there's a topic to be had here. Anyway, audience etiquette, what does it like to me? So I will go all the way back to when I was about 3 or 4 years old, when my cousin took me to my first live theatrical experience. It was a high school production of Peter Pan. And my parents asked me, what do I want to wear? And I chose my little vest and bow tie and dress shirt and dress pants and
Naturally.
dress shoes. Naturally, I looked very dapper. My cousin showed up in basically like jeans and a hoodie. She looked at me and went, "Ah, crap, Aunt Maggie. I got to go home and change." So she actually went home and changed, got into something a little bit nicer, came back and got me. We went and saw Peter Pan. And, and then my parents took me to see Les Mis when I was 4 with Colm Wilkinson. So I've been going to these shows since I was very young. It's been something that, my parents have taught me, where it's like, if you're going to go be in this adult environment, because we did do a lot of pantomimes. Our parents weren't into the pantomimes. They were into the adult theater stuff. So, it was one of those things where it was all about if you're going to go to these adult environments, you're going to dress properly. You're not going to look schlubby, shaved, you look good. You're at the bare minimum doing business casual of some kind. And then, you're going to go there. And once cell phones became a thing, it was all about, turn your cell phone off and be an attentive audience member. Even going to my sister's dance recitals, I was all about, phone off, attentive. My mother wasn't so much. There was one time where we were at a dance recital and she was on her phone between all the dances that weren't ours or my sister's. So I told her, turn your phone off or else I'm moving seats. So she did. But then, I went to Stratford Shakespeare School and they were also about bring dress clothes, not jeans. Bring dress pants or a few dresses or, something to wear that is professional because you will be representing the festival at these performances. So, that was something there. So, it's something that I've always grown up with, where it's you show up dressed decently, business casual at the bare minimum. You come into the theater, unless you have some specialized reason why your phone needs to be on, you're on emergency call as a doctor, or, you have to have it for a hearing thing, to help you hear the show. 10 minutes before the show, check your email one last time. You're going to get it in 90 minutes or an hour at intermission. Turn your phone off, put it in your pocket, unwrap those lozenges or pop the gum, whatever you're going to do. And then you sit quietly and you watch a show and you react appropriately. If it's a pantomime, obviously, the show is encouraging you to react. If it's Anne Juliet or Six the Musical, you're encouraged to be raucous and be on your phone because they've set that parameter for you ahead of time. They've encouraged it. But for the most part, a lot of commercial or performances and even indie performances do encourage phone off, be attentive, be an active member, not a distracted one. You're paying for this intimate experience, get your money's worth. So for me, I'm follow the guideline of what the theater is telling you. If they say phone off, that doesn't mean put your phone on silent. It means phone off unless there is a dire reason why your phone should be on to begin with. So for me, I'm just common decency in the world. Even when I go to Cineplex to see a movie, my phone is off. My friends keep their phones on. I just went and saw Titanic with my roommate. She had her phone on and she was texting during the movie with her screen light down, but I could still catch it. I was doing the side eye every once in a while because I'm we just paid money to see this movie. Can we not disconnect and just be in the moment and be an active audience member enjoying a story? Do we really need this on all the time? Do I need to text Jill right away while I'm watching a movie? If I'm in my own home, sure. Who gives a flying fadoo? But you're now impeding other people around you. So for me, I'm audience etiquette means you're in there, you're an active audience member, you're dressed appropriately, not in track pants, not in just t-shirt and schlubby. You show up looking pretty good. You're going there to be an attentive audience member. You're giving the actors and performers who are there your full undivided attention because they're giving you their full undivided energy. As Jill, any good performer does. When you go out on that stage, you're not giving 50%. Doesn't matter if it's the matinee or the evening show. You're giving 110% because you want to make sure people get their money's worth. So that's a long rambling way of saying that's what theater etiquette means to me.
No, this is great. Yeah. And Mack TED Talk of audience etiquette. I want to, going forward, Ryan, you and I in this question, I want to go right ahead because Mack's already touched upon it and we can expand, but we'll chat about our relationship to cell phone usage in the theater and also dress code. I just think that kind of naturally is where we're going. So let's ride with it. I might take the next step. Is that cool, Ryan?
Okay.
So I agree and disagree with a lot of your points, Mack. First of all, again, I'm probably going to be coming into this conversation a lot as the actor because I feel like of the three of us, I have a I'm on stages right now. So it's kind of like audiences are that extra cast member, whether it is a panto, which viewers, listeners, I've been doing a lot of those recently, which we can get into. Thank you. But just really quickly, a panto, they're literally expected to hoot and holler for the goodies, the good characters, and they are literally expected to boo and hiss and back in the olden days, throw stuff at the bad characters. So whether you like it or not, if you're in a panto, you have a character objective, but then also constantly going throughout the whole piece, you have an audience navigation objective. So alongside that as well, I'm coming at this. I've done a lot of theater for young audiences shows since I've graduated, where my audience members are below the age of 10. So there are attention spans that are different and snacks that need to be had that rustle. There's just a very different perspective than, dealing with a Mirvish or a Stratford audience. But I think overall, regardless, and I think I'm coming at this because I've had a lot of my theatrical experiences have been disrupted audiences are almost expected. I personally don't care what you wear. I think we're living in an age where, like I myself, I look business casual or business plus to go. But I think anybody going to any type of theater, whether it is indie or a school performance or Mirvish, you should feel comfortable in whatever that means to you. I don't think it's necessary to wear like expletive logos on your shirt and stuff like that, but that goes for anything that's kind of, you're going to be exposed to other people in like a tight space. But I think it's nice for people to be like, oh, we'll dress up, go to the theater. But like, if you want to come in jeans and the hoodie because you feel comfortable doing that, and I don't know what else you have going on in your life, and this is maybe like, I barely got out of bed to come to the show, wear your jeans and hoodie. So I think dress code wise as a performer and as an audience member, I don't really care per se. In regards to cell phone too, I disagree with turning it completely off. And I know that is massive. Someone who has done musicals where having cell phones on can disrupt the frequency of microphones and any other things. But unfortunately, I feel like even though we're in Canada, we do not live in a safe enough society where having your phone completely off to the point where if you have to turn that thing completely on in an emergency situation, I personally don't want to run the risk of waiting 2 minutes, potentially 2 minutes too long, to be able to dial 911 or get in contact with whoever I need to get in contact with. I think this either goes with the theater, but I think it especially goes to our movie theaters. I hate to say it, but like if a shooter comes in or something violent happens or there's a massive disruption that happens to the building, a theater, yes, it is a magical space, but it also is just another public space. I want to be able to have contact with my phone instantly. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to have it open and text and call. Absolutely not. I totally agree with you there, Mack, of like, you are dedicated to yourself and especially to the people around you who you don't know how much money they paid for tickets. You don't know, is this their first or a super special performance for them to attend to? I think there's that basic human decency of being cognizant to those around you. What I do is I leave it on silent, absolutely no alarms, no vibration, completely silent. And I turn it face down just underneath my seat so that even if I do get a text or a notification, it isn't lighting up, it's faced down. And I don't pick that up until intermission or until the end of the show. I prefer to do that as an audience member. And I know that's might be shocking coming from someone who maybe people keeping their cell phones on ruins the quality of my microphone while I'm skrelting over the moon to the audience. But honestly, I don't care. It's live theater. Live theater will have hiccups and ticks or whatever in the experience anyways. I want people to feel safe. However, with that, absolutely do not text or make a phone call. I even feel if you know you're going to be on call and these on-call hours are going to be when you are called to the theater, I think you should reschedule or maybe let ushers know I will have to duck in and out potentially. Can I sit to the far left, right, or the far right so I can sneak out? I think there's it's a case by case scenario. But I feel like I'm rambling on those two topics. However, one thing I do want to mention is, again, me coming from performer perspective here, but the theater isn't a hierarchy space, like a hierarchical space, meaning like just because there's actors on the stage doesn't make them better or worse than the people who attend the plays. And I think like historically, audience etiquette has been evolving and shuffling around different protocols and what have you. I think something, especially coming out of this pandemic, we need to realize as performers and as audience members that like live theater does not exist unless there are people on stage, and especially because there are audiences in seats. So I'm totally down to navigate what we need to navigate as a performer with our audience members because we need them. We can't not have audience members. But I think, again, I'm rambling a bit too, and we'll get further into discussion. But I think overall, come to the theater how you want to come. Keep your device on if you need your device on, but absolutely silent it. Do not disrupt others around you. But like, and obviously don't be rude, but just you're here to have an experience and I'm here to give you an experience, right? And like I said, whether we like it or not, like performers, you have to be prepared for there to be interruptions. Again, this is liveness. We're all humans. There might be someone who has a tickle in their throat, and instead of coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing, you might have to pop that lozenge just so that you're not coughing for the rest of Act 1. And like, I think personally, and again, maybe it's because I've been trained to almost never, I honestly feel like when I just did a performance in January where absolutely I did not break the fourth wall, and the audience, my character relationship was like non-existent and very distant. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. This is so weird that they're not on this journey with me. And pieces will ask for that. But I think it's part of our job as the performer to realize that and to professionally handle that. Again, this isn't a hierarchy. You might have someone who coughs. You might have someone who laughs loudly. And again, we'll get into this, but I have many thoughts about professional actors butting their noses in when it's like, you're a professional. You should be able to navigate that. Anyways, I'm going to stop because we're getting into other questions. Ryan.
Okay, so I am not a performer, so I am approaching this kind of mainly in my domain, which is theater theory and theater history, because that's how I tend to come to these things, as somebody who studies this in an academic setting. And so I'll start with theory, and then maybe that'll dovetail nicely into history a little bit, but on a theoretical level, I would say that I don't believe in the concept of etiquette. Not that I think it doesn't exist, but that I don't necessarily think that it should exist. Because if you ask me, I think etiquette was invented to socially police the lower classes. It was really, and this isn't just theater etiquette, this is etiquette of all stripes, but just the idea that there is a proper way to comport yourself when dealing with society is something that has kind of been constructed to say that these are the rules that proper people follow, and people who don't follow do not deserve to be sharing these spaces with us. That, you can, any way you slice it, any discussion of etiquette kind of leads back to some kind of history in that level. So I have a very hard time, even if I can understand practical reasons why some of these rules or protocols or structures of etiquette maybe would come into play in a space like theater, because maybe it is distracting for the people around you. At the end of the day, these rules exist and are enforced largely to communicate to people who do not abide to them that you are not welcome here. And people who come from a lower class position are more likely to not be aware of those rules or not know how to comport themselves in that way. And that will make other people make them feel uncomfortable about the space they are taking up and make them less likely to want to go back to the theater because they feel unwelcome there. And yeah, I feel like, we will kind of deal with this on a more point-by-point level when we deal with some of the other topics here. But at the end of the day, I think that is why I cannot really get down with there are specific ways you must behave, whether that comes down to dress code, which implies that you do own proper, good, Sunday bests, if you will, that, you will break out for the theater because you're going to a place where everybody's supposed to be dressing in this very sophisticated, read high class kind of way. And it's, I think we can, we'll unpack more and more of these different ways. But I think to just kind of, bracket this off for a second, to now approach it somewhat historically, it's kind of weird that theater is the space that even developed its own structures or codes of etiquette in this way, because what we, I think, associate with theater etiquette is not something that is trans-historical or has existed as long as theater itself has. What we kind of consider the sort of bog standard theater etiquette, as in you, audience, sit quietly, no distractions, fancy attire, in the dark, watching the performers on stage, giving them your utmost respect, that was basically invented in the mid-19th century. And for the most part, it was invented by a few different people and historical forces, but one person in particular we can give the most credit for, and that's Richard Wagner, who is the opera virtuoso from Germany, who had his theater in Bayreuth, where he put on these kinds of shows and really set in stone a lot of these structures that we now associate with this, audience in dark, actors in light, divided by a very rigid fourth wall of the proscenium arch, even if they're singing operatically, and that doesn't feel like it belongs in this kind of self-contained world that we associate with the fourth wall, but that's a different story altogether. But it was all part of his idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, that everything on stage is coming together to create this pure, magical, perfect thing, and you exist in the dark to not be part of that. You are watching it, witnessing the great work of art, but you are not really treated as part of that experience. And if we think historically about this thing emerging at this particular time, we also have to think about how this particular time existed prior to a lot of things that we maybe now take for granted, as in it existed before cinema, or at least the kind of widespread popularization of cinema as this competing art form to theater, and especially home video and now streaming, which we see has rapidly changed the way we consume even film, that prior to had to either be in a public cinema, which replicated some of the structures of theater, or in a private screening if you had the means to do so. But we can think about how it's sort of weird that we are still abiding by these, mid to late 19th century structures when the rest of our world has changed in a lot of ways. The fact that you can now watch infinite movies from your couch at home and privately in your own space without all these other people around you, or just your close friends or roommates or loved ones with you, we kind of have to think about, well, what does it mean differently to see something in a theater, to have this communal shared experience with other people? Because, books upon books upon books have been written about this kind of thing, but that in a changing media landscape where we have these alternatives, Wagner didn't have cinema to compete against. He was just saying, this is what I think theater, and particularly opera, should look like in terms of this type of structure of performance and structures of audience behavior. But he didn't have to worry about, well, yes, people are coming to the theater for this shared experience with their fellow humans instead of watching a movie on their couch at home. That just isn't something that would have even been presented as an option. And we need to think about how, the world we have has cell phones in it. We all walk around with these tiny little computers in our pockets that, maybe can be disruptive and shine bright lights, but the only reason why that bright light bothers us is because we're sitting in the dark. Why are we sitting in the dark? Well, because Wagner decided about 150 years ago, maybe the audience shouldn't be in the dark, and then your cell phone light wouldn't bother anybody. And so I just think we need to really be, through this historical and theoretical exercise, we can unpack why are these structures the way they are, and is there really a good reason for them? If we change one thing a little slightly, does it kind of completely negate the issue that we're even being presented with here. And if we go even pre-Wagner, we could see how most of theater before him was a raucous, rowdy space, similar to, Jill, what you described with the panto. Yeah, like the Restoration period is especially famous, where people were going to the theater not just to, quietly respect what was on the stage, but it was a space to see and be seen. You wanted people to be like, oh, you're going to the theater, and did you know he's having an affair? And, it was a space of gossip more so, and it was just, what was happening on stage was kind of just a pretext for getting people out into the social setting. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of artistry on display or that people didn't care about the artistry, but they went hand in hand and they weren't partitioned in this way that we may be associated with today. So I could say more. I certainly can say more, and we have more questions where I can get into this more point by point, but I think we kind of would be wise to rethink whether or not we think etiquette is even a good social force. I don't think it is. And if we don't, then maybe we should be rethinking how can we change the theater in accordance with our changing world, and really think about what theater should be in this world where we have so many different media options, so many different relationships to media and narrative and the stories that we encounter, so that we're not just marching in place because Wagner told us to. That's my opening statement, and we'll get more into other things in a second.
Yeah, I think before we segue too, I'm also looking at this from, now that we've all kind of cracked this open, like even the way that our audiences are being set up, like especially in Toronto and with like the smaller theater houses, like for instance, Coal Mines Yerma was in this very intimate square setup for the audience. We just talked about like the pantos going on all across Ontario right now. Like there's different like setups for our audience too that I think are breaking us out of the, like, I want to say like old school proscenium style. Like a lot of our commercial houses still do that too, but I think obviously like today we'll be talking a lot about the individual audience member and what their etiquette is and how that affects performances and whatever. But I also think the orientation of our audience can add or subtract from etiquette too. So I just throwing that out there as a thought bubble to speak on if it comes up. Okay, so segueing to, we've kind of all alluded to this already, but Mack, when this was sort of going through your brain, notably actress Patti LuPone, we all have seen probably on the news by now that she stopped shows to address these audience type disruptions like live recordings, photos, and mask wearing. And I want to say too, those are three very different but equally disruptive things. So should performers have the right to stop performances when they feel distractions are impeding their performance? Ryan, do you want to start us off with that?
Yes. Well, I guess based on my opening statement, you could kind of guess where I might land on this. But here's the thing. In defense of Patti LuPone, among the many other performers who have kind of made statements like this, I know there's been a bunch, Mack, you could probably rattle off a better list than I can. I don't know, do you want to quickly rattle off a list before I finish here?
I mean, the big one's Patti LuPone. I know of 3 instances where she has stopped things. I can break down all 3. There was an incident on her second to last performance in Gypsy, where it got to the big final Roses turn, big final climactic number. And this person was in the theater with their flash on, taking pictures of her doing her performance. And there's an audio recording of her yelling, like somebody in the balcony did, have their phone on and recorded her berating this audience member till they left. There is the incident where she was doing some play somewhere and somebody's phone kept ringing. And so she stopped the show and once again told them to either leave or turn off your phone. The last one, which is the most notable one that happened recently, was there was a company was just revived on Broadway. Patti LuPone won her 3rd Tony for her performance as Joanne. And after one of the performances, there was a Q&A with Marion Elliott, like 3-time Tony Award-winning director, Patti LuPone, and a few other cast members who were there. And there was an audience member who had their mask around their chin. They had been falling asleep during the show because they were like in the first 2 rows. And the theater made it very clear that if you were going to be in the theater with it, like because of performers, and at the time it was what we were still coming out of the pandemic, it was please wear your mask. And so this person asked some type of belligerent question, and Patti saw that they weren't following the mask mandates. And she reamed them out for this. And there was a notable moment where this person said, well, I pay your paycheck. And Patti gave a great shot back of, actually, no, it was, I forget the producer's name, but it was producer, let's say, Bob Smith, who pays my paycheck, not you. And the theater gave very clear directions on wearing your mask, and you are not following it. And you are endangering myself, who, if I get sick, I'm out performances, which means I don't get paid, and as well as my fellow cast members. And you're also affecting other audience members around you who may be asymptomatic or whatever, may be affected by whatever, because this was still early on when they were still getting vaccines out and things like that. It was right when Bar reopened. So tensions were already very high at this point. And now Patti has come out, and notably she has renounced her theater union card, saying that with the way audiences are acting nowadays, with being on their phones and not following the guidelines given by the theater for audiences, she's just done. So she says, I'd rather do film, act for a camera, than put my heart out on stage and have half the audience members not paying attention to me, doing their own shit. Because, so anyway, so that's Patti LuPone. Those are her three big notable things. There are other actors. Mandy Patinkin's talked about a time where he almost spoke out against somebody who he thought was snoring in the first box next to the stage. Turns out they weren't. They were on a breathing machine. So Mandy's like, thank God I didn't say anything on that one. And then, notably in Hadestown, actress Lilith White, who's playing Hermes in this, there was an audience member, like second or third row from the front, who was holding kind of a device that looked like this. She thought it was a cell phone. It was not. It was a listening aid device. But she kind of stopped the show to kind of ream them out a bit. And so the audience member went on the news and said, I felt belittled. I felt hurt by this. I paid good money. I came to see her and she belittled me. That type of thing there. So anyway, so that is the three big incidences that I know of. I'm sure there are others that have gone on over time, but like these are the three stories I have heard that have come forward anyway. So anyway, Ryan, back to you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And Mack, so thank you for kind of providing that whole list. And I can think of other examples that I've heard about. Like there's the Wendell Pierce example in Death of a Salesman, famously.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That's a very good one.
Yeah. Bunk Moreland from The Wire.
Audience member disrupted the whole show. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Like, so there's clearly this, again, this is where this is prompted by not just your experience that the shark is broken, but this is a thing that's in the discourse right now. But I guess to the spirit of the question, should we be deputizing the actors themselves, or should the actors feel deputized to be, enforcing this or talking back in this way? Gotta say no. And, to be fair to people like Patti LuPone and all these other actors, I can understand why. This goes back to what I was saying before about the uniqueness of theater competing with all these other media, is that, you are sharing the space, with the performers, so they can be distracted in a way that a film actor cannot be. And I don't envy the performers for having that kind of position. I think if we maybe, as I said before, rethought the way we think about theater etiquette, maybe all actors could kind of be trained like panto actors are and be more able to kind of, yes and to these types of disruptions. But that's perhaps a different story. But I on a case-by-case basis, I can understand things like the mask wearing example. I'm glad that one happened during a talkback as opposed to stopping the performance itself. And yes, that's more of like a conversational space between the performer and the audience. And, I take public health very seriously, even though we are well past the point where the pandemic is over, I say in big quotation marks, as a lot of people say.
We are post-vaccine. It's not over.
Yes.
We are post-vaccine.
Okay, yes. But like, we're past the point where, most theaters don't have mask mandates anymore, and people do just go, I still wear my mask to pretty much every show I go to, because it's an easy enough thing to do. I don't have respiratory issues that make it difficult for me to wear one for a long period of time, and it just seems like the responsible way to comport myself, even if I'm not going to insist everyone else do that too. But in a time when that was a mandate put forward by the theater, and many theaters still do have those mandates, I can understand, in the context of a talkback, her saying, like, you should put your mask on. I think it's interesting the response that person gave, that I pay your salary. And even before we get to her quippy comeback, I think this is interesting because this comes back to something, Jill, you said about the hierarchy between the performer and the audience. I would say that comment, and Mack, even something you said earlier in your opening statement there about how, like, we've all paid a lot of money for these tickets. We, should be able to, like, sit quietly and watch this show. Again, the fact that theater tickets are so expensive is part of the whole policing lower classes, making this an inaccessible space for a lot of people to even afford. Therefore, that comes with the presumption that if you're here and if you're paying so much, you must already understand how theater works because you are of the class that can afford this. But that's a bit of a side point. But I think it's interesting that he feels like I pay your salary because Jill, I think
it was a woman.
Apologies.
Yep.
That this person feels like they pay Patti LuPone's salary because Jill, I think, while I understand where your comment comes from of the hierarchy before the actors are the stars on stage and the audience are the groundlings below them, I think the opposite is actually true. That there is a sense of ownership that audiences possess towards the actors by virtue of the fact that they pay such exorbitant rates for these tickets. That there is this kind of like, subtle glaze of indentured servitude mentality that I have spent a lot of money for this ticket, you work for me. And that kind of puts the hierarchy, and I think a lot of these etiquette rules put the hierarchy stance towards the audience being in the position of power over the dance monkey dance. I am your king, your patron, I pay your salary. Which, historically, if we go even further back in times with less rigid theater etiquette rules, that was the case, that there was a king or a lord who was the patron of the company.
The Queen's men.
Yeah.
In Shakespeare's time,
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that, I would say that, that kind of goes to that specific case. But just to get back to the original question here, it's funny because I think if we kind of boil this down to its core, a lot of these questions about etiquette come back to immersion. The thing that Wagner was trying to create is that we are creating this immersive space where you can blank out the world and all the, these bodies here and just immerse yourself in the show. And if that is the argument for why etiquette is, or at least part of the argument for why etiquette is so important, I think it's a little rich that actors like Patti LuPone are willing to break that immersion so easily to tell one random person in the audience to shut the hell up or do whatever. That is it really about the immersion? Maybe you as the actor could be doing more to sustain that immersion instead of, being willing to break it on the drop of a hat because you think that everyone else must be just as distracted as you are by this one person. And I really think this kind of, it's not the actor's job to be the bouncer in this case. They feel like because I'm in center stage, everyone's looking at me, it is my duty to say what we're all thinking, I bet. But that's what ushers are for. That's what front of house staff is for. And I really think it's kind of just a knowing your position, knowing your place, knowing what your job is. And people haven't necessarily, we're not paying your salary, to use the idiom of that one person, so you can take it upon yourself to dole out justice how you see fit. We are, quote, paying your salary to see you perform the show. And that's all we want to kind of do this. And I think this does go, Jill, to what you're saying about the hierarchy of the actor feeling galvanizes because, well, I'm Patti LuPone, I'm the star. If I say it, people will listen, and maybe Playbill will write an article about me tomorrow. Maybe that's good for my brand. Which, I'm not trying to be cynical and say that these things are done in a calculated way because it's, all publicity is good publicity, but you never know. That maybe is an incentive that is motivating some of this. But I guess just one... Sorry, Jill, you wanted to jump on because you have...
No, go ahead. You can sum up.
I guess just one last thought, and this kind of goes back to some of the theoretical things I was saying before, is, it's less about this specifically, but kind of I think it's something that's going to come back over and over again, and it comes back to the different, like, competing choice of media, is we tend to favor theater as this space where it's not just, you sitting on your couch watching the movie, or it's a shared experience. The audience is there. The actors are there. We're all in this moment together. And yet I think all of these etiquette rules actively contradict that very thing that everyone is always saying. I see your face, Mack, but I'll let you respond in a second. But the second we see evidence of the people around us, suddenly we're shushing. Or turn off your cell phone. Or when, at the end of the day, that's the experience. That is exactly why we claim we like going to the theater because we get to share this moment with other people. Now, Mac, I assume your face is kind of making that face because you're thinking, but we're not sharing the experience if someone's distracting us or on their phone or they're not in that moment.
It's individualistic. We're breaking the experience.
But that's, in my opinion, that's their problem. At the end of the day, you are still in a room with another person, and even if they aren't having the same experience with you, that's another thing we're always praising theater for, that everybody has their own different experience, and we encounter it in different ways from different angles. It's cubism. Isn't that great? But I think, yeah, we tend to make these lofty arguments about sharing experiences with other people until those other people become a nuisance, i.e. by just doing their own thing. And yeah, so that's, just another reason why I don't think the actor should take it upon themselves to be the judge, jury, and executioner of that swift justice.
Yeah, I think, Mac, if you don't mind, just because Ryan kind of said mostly of what I wanted to say, but I have a segue, I think, to you, because I again, I'm playing Switzerland here. I'm half and half. So I totally agree with Ryan. Absolutely freaking not do performers have the right to stop the show. I'm sorry. And this is coming from someone, I have only pretty much done theater since I've graduated. I'm only just now getting into the world of film and TV, which is a no audience. And that alone scares me. And yes, I realize, like I said, most of my experiences have either been theater for young audiences or pantos or like immersive theater experiences. But I just think all in all, it comes down to trusting the rest of your team. And I don't just mean the people that are on stage with you or backstage with you or in the booth. I'm talking about audience members. Trust there, but I'll cycle back to them in a second. But what Ryan said, ushers, your front of house team, they are just as much important to the experience as your performance. And they will, or they should, proctor all of these things. If there is someone recording or there is someone who is not following mask mandates, that is their job. It is absolutely not our job as a performer to break down the storytelling vehicle experience that you are supposed to be playing because they're not following the rules. If it's distracting to you, here's what I would say. Realize that it's distracting to you as a performer. It's maybe going to go away. It's maybe not. But guess what? It's a live experience. First of all, we're trained to fall by the seat of our pants or do stuff in the drop of a hat if someone forgets a line on stage, if a glass gets broken on the table, but it's not broken on the stage. There's things we have to be ready to improv within the storytelling. So why can't we be ready to improv with the audience as well? But cycling back to audience, don't come to the theater if you are going to be an asshole. And by asshole, I mean, if you don't want to wear masks, but you know that this theater does ask for masks, don't come. This isn't the show for you, or this isn't the theater for you. I'm talking mostly in like the major part of the pandemic especially, excuse me. Because you have to be cognizant of the people around you. So I think in a way I'm kind of with Mac in the sense of like, these things shouldn't even be happening to start. But if they do, it is the usher's job to figure that out. And like, yes, is it frustrating being a performer on stage and having someone record or having someone take pictures? Absolutely. However, you have dedicated yourself as a performer to be vulnerably expressing in so many different ways. How to navigate that, and I know I've done this before, even though we are in like panto experiences of like the audience or whatever, I've gone backstage and I have said to my director or front of house team, there's someone recording and they're not supposed to be recording. Can you talk to that audience member intermission? Or can you, it's the person wearing the magenta shirt in the upper row. Can you at the end of the show ask them to delete something? I've literally said that backstage. Or if someone is cougher, I've gone off stage, and this isn't just with pantos, I've gone off stage after doing a scene and almost as a little assistant stage manager kind of moment, I've said to my fellow actors, there's someone who's got a really tickly throat today, guys. Like there's a cougher in the audience. So be aware that's going to happen. But I think when you as the actor stop and halt a show because you can't continue, that's on you. And to be honest, me as an audience member, if I see that happening, that's saying, you are being unprofessional as the actor, especially if your show requires you to have the fourth wall and you're breaking that. And then B, you're disrupting anyone else who wasn't bothered by it, which is probably like 75% of the house. You're disrupting their experience now. You're forcing someone in a very awkward, vulnerable position of, I don't think Patti's playing a character anymore. And what should I do? Should I, as a fellow audience member, heckle this person too? Then I think the actor is now breaking the rules, and then God knows what's going to happen. Freaking chaos could break out, right? It's such an interesting line to tread. But I think, again, Mack, I'm going to volley it to you in a second, but just final statement of it is absolutely not the performer's right to do that. And as a performer, I find it unprofessional. And if you know you're someone who's tipped off and ticked off by that stuff happening, how do you need to change your practice to tune that out? And what do you need to do? Maybe you are someone who's super active backstage in a sense of like, I noticed this and this and this and this during intermission or at the end of the show. Can you please let stage management in front of house know? Maybe you're that person, but don't put it in the story, because then you're doing a detriment to every single person's experience, including your scene partners, including the people on stage, that now you're making them seem putting them in a vulnerable and sort of abrasive position. You are the voice of the character you're playing. You're not the voice of the theater. You're not the voice of the production. So that's my stance on that. But Mack.
Sorry. I have so much to say on this. So, first of all, I feel as a society, we have become much more individualistic because we now have people who will pick fights with ushers. There's a reason why ushers stopped going up to people, telling them to put their mask back on, because they got yelled at and told to fuck off. It's my right. It's my mask. I don't want to wear it. So, ushers stopped doing it because, ushers are young people usually who are doing a part-time job, not doing this as a full-time adult. So now they have to go to an adult, and the adult is not respecting the space. Because when we go into a theater, we all make a group contract that says now, society-wise, we have all decided to follow the 150 years ago Wagner's rule of lights and whatever, and So this is the like hockey games have rules of yell, cheer, be on your phone, spill your beer, throw your peanuts, whatever. When we go to a theater, there's an announcement at the beginning that we all agree to that please turn your cell phones off or put them on silent mode. Do not take pictures. Do not do a live recording. Now, when I was at Joseph, for example, Joseph Asian Tyler Dreamcoat, Lloyd Webber specifically said at the end, for the finale, please take your phones out and record the finale bows, because we're going to have a big dance party number. And we want you to post that on social media. Six comes out at the beginning and says, please take your phones out and record us, because this is going to be a live concert experience for you. But we all go in, we all make a group contract together saying we will turn our cell phones off, we will not take pictures, we will not do a live recording. Now you got Jim Bob up there in the back row recording on his phone or taking photos with his flash. Now he's broken the group contract. Now he's being individualistic. And because people are so abrasive and so angry nowadays in the world, they're willing to be confrontational and say, well, I paid for my ticket. I can do whatever the hell I like. And it's like, no, we all agreed to a group contract. And now you're scaring this poor usher who's just trying to do their job of telling you to stop. And now you're not stopping. With that Patti LuPone story of the gypsy story, the person who started taking flash photos of her in Act 1, she then told the ushers, go talk to that person at intermission. They didn't stop. She gets to her big final number. This is her second last show. The flash has been going the entire 3-hour experience. And she said, you heard the announcement at the beginning. The ushers told you at intermission to stop, because I know, because I confirmed it with them. And now you've done it again, because there's an announcement at the beginning, at the end of intermission saying, show's about to recommence, please turn off your phones. Or turn off your flashes, no flash photography. So this person ignored the announcement 3 times. I don't blame Patti LuPone for stopping it. She went through all the proper avenues. That audience member was a dick and decided they were going to be individualistic. So when you go out to a public space, we are all making an agreement. We all agree to wear our masks because for the betterment of the health of society, we all said we're going to put our masks on and respect that rule. There are people who don't, who say it's not my responsibility if you are asymptomatic and can't handle that. You stay home. It's like, no, we all paid money for our tickets. This is the rules we've all set for each other. We follow the rules. And the rules are you show up, you turn your phone off or put it on silent, vibrate, no screen mode, and we all sit attentively and watch the show. You choosing to get out your phone to record Patti LuPone so you can have that one little audio clip for yourself for later. No, I'm sorry. No. And you know what? There are people like Patti LuPone who have the ability because they are strong veterans of the theater who can do that. There are people who are, like Jill.
I totally disagree with that. I disagree with, sorry. I'm just like, I don't think it matters how long you've been in the theater to be like, great, you've now entered the tier of disrupting an entire performance.
But they're disrupting it because the rest of the avenues have failed them as a performer.
But I think you trudge your way through that show, and then that person is banned from the theater.
Yeah,
to me, I pick up what you're putting down, Mack, of the usher. First of all, if it is as big of like a recording, and like they have been told specifically, and even an intermission, then that usher should have gone in and booted out that person. I think that's.
But then that person starts to fight with them and disrupts the whole show, as we've now seen in many cases. Or, in some cases, people decide to punch the usher in the face and break their nose.
But can I maybe
which
add
we'll
to
get
that?
into another question.
You've kind of brought up this question, and I think it's, to me, these feel like very separate questions, because I think if somebody is berating ushers or assaulting ushers, we are so far from what we consider theater etiquette at this point. This is just, conduct and
asshole
law
people.
And assault. And we don't tolerate that on a TTC train. We don't tolerate that on the street. Why would we tolerate it in our theater? This has nothing to do with theater etiquette at this point. Now, to talk about the cell phone recording, the reason why that's a bad thing, and like you said, some shows permit it, is because you are recording someone without their consent. They have not agreed to be part of your home movie. And so that's...
It's also just distracting because there's a light on all the time.
Okay, but that's, to me,
it's never a dark screen in your pocket like this, where, you put it in there, kind of hide it.
But Mack,
you get somebody sitting there like that.
Here's where I think this question becomes kind of draws a line between what is just ethics, i.e. don't record someone without their consent, and etiquette, i.e. you're distracting people. That's bad etiquette. Mm-hmm. And kind of feel like we should sort of make it clear when these two separate topics, just general ethics and etiquette, are blending together, because we should be clear about what our ethical parameters are, even without lumping them into this is the proper conduct for attending the theater.
But we've all made a contract. There's an announcement that says do not record. What gives that person the right to disrupt everybody else around them and the performer on stage to get out a phone and record Patti LuPone, Carolee Carmello, Mandy Patinkin on stage? I guess to there's a group contract.
But what gives that person the right to essentially break the law to record, like, not just the social contract of the theater, but just the social contract of the law of, breaching someone's privacy and recording them without their consent? Like, that is separate from the contract of theater. That is just that, you shouldn't do the bad thing. That is separate from just the contract we agreed on. And, like, these contracts aren't necessarily made clear to everyone before they enter the theater. Like, just so you know, you can't record. And I'm not saying that, therefore, permits them to record. It's still a bad, wrong thing to do. And when the usher tells you don't do that, you don't yell at or assault that usher, because that's just a bad thing to do in general. This is just general ethics. It has nothing to do with the etiquette of the sacred artistic space.
I think I see what Ryan's saying too, about how it is different, like etiquette and ethics. And I think we're all in agreement of, like, from a sheer non-consent purpose, do not record. Like, that to me, and I keep going back to this, of like, we're swearing a lot in this episode, but I feel like it's fine.
Okay.
Don't be an asshole.
The subject calls for swearing. Yes.
Yeah, like, don't be an asshole. Over, like, and stop, right? And that means, like, don't record. Yes. Is it disruptive to other people? Like you're putting down, Mack? Absolutely. That's like an added assy holy thing that happens. But the main crux of it is, Patti did not give her consent to that. Now, my only thing is, like, she can go off in a question and answer, or go off, like, in an interview post show, or scream and holler behind the stage, but you do not have the right to stop a performance. Like, I think, honestly, there's actor etiquette too, right? Like, and again, I'm going to bring it back to Panto and TYA. If I have a kid who is being absolutely disruptive and commenting on every single line that I say, which when I played Paper Bag Princess in the Paper Bag Princess musical, where I was performing inside schools from kindergarten kids to 8th grade, you can imagine the fidgeting and whatever. But I remember there was one kid who was sitting in the front row, and every line we said, he had a comment about. It was like this little kid that I'm like, you are going to be this big critic who is just not liking what's happening. And I could not stop the show and say, listen, Tommy, enough is enough. Stop commenting on everything I say. I am doing a performance, and you were told by Mrs. So-and-so that you have to be quiet and sit cross-legged. Could you imagine what that would look like of this like Robert Munch fantastical character that everybody knows and loves and adores, cutting the fourth wall in half and berating a 4-year-old simply because I can't continue my tap dance number because this little kid in the sweater vest is being a tiny little shit, So I look at it and I think, yes, adults are very different than humans in the way of like, there should be enough experience. There should be enough sort of following the rules and comprehending and understanding. But I don't care how old you are. I don't think, like, again, as the performer, that is not your job. Again, if that person was not handled properly, absolutely, I think Patti or anybody, regardless of what your status is in the theater, can have a stern talking to the front of house and say, listen, I did not sign off on people recording. That is the second time that's happened. And if you want me to perform the next show, shut that down. I think she absolutely could do that. But to make it be a performance thing, I don't agree.
And I think there's nothing wrong with front of house being deputized to stop a show if something very disruptive is happening. It's not the actor's decision, or the actor can tell front of house that they would like that to happen, and then or just like by how stage management stops a show when a glass breaks and we need to pause and clean this up because this is unsafe. If somebody is really making a big ruckus or recording when they shouldn't and yelling at the front of house, I think the usher or the head of front of house has the right to say, we are going to stop the show until this situation is dealt with, and then we will resume after it's happened. Like, how many times have we been in a show where the fire alarm goes off and we all have to evacuate, and we resume after? It's okay for the real world of safety conditions, and general ethics does kind of fit into that, to be a reason to interrupt the show. But it's from the artistic perspective, I don't think the actor is the one to make that decision, at least not without consulting with front of house or stage management.
I think too, when you're saying there too, Ryan, like the real world people, like in the theatrical experience, that is our front of house manager and our stage manager. These are positions that are baked into the experience where they are the liaisons between the mystical and the realistic, right? Like the stage manager is responsible for all of the actors and to make this magical show experience occur. But also, if there is alarms going off or emergency, they have one foot in reality and one foot in surreality. Is that a word? Sure. Yep. I think, Ryan, you're bringing up a good point. And what I like about this discussion, the three of you, is that I feel like we're finding tangents by talking about audience etiquette of like, is it ethics? Is it etiquette? I think front of house should also kind of have a quote unquote God mic like stage management. I think front of house and stage management should be besties. They should be on channel number 1 of like, hey, so which, they are, right? Of like, we're going to have to hold the house for 5 minutes, just so you know, don't call in the intermission curtain yet because we don't have everybody back to their seats. But maybe this is a conversation to now have as well of if the audience is getting so disrupted, because Mack, I hear what you're saying. Unfortunately, we live in a society where people are all about me, and there is this sort of, especially post-pandemic, I think a comfort of being like, I'm back in the theater. So regardless of who I am or how I am, I'm at least back in the theater. So I pick up what you're putting down of like, okay, you're back in the theater, but you are back in the theater. So like, have some common decency. But maybe us realizing that audience audience etiquette maybe is a bit lax because people are kind of confused, especially coming back post-pandemic. And there are shows out there now that encourage audience reaction. Varying rules happen. Maybe this is a conversation of giving front of house a little bit more agency in like when they can call the shots, right? I think that's interesting because absolutely ushers being that this question's kind of floating into our mouths now, but ushers being abused, absolutely freaking not. Take that person out. I don't want that person in the space too. Someone who is being that, again, I'm always like, I am just a tiny piece in the whole slice of theater when I'm performing, right? My front of house people, I worship and adore. And so if I know that an audience member is treating someone like that, I don't want them in the space. This is supposed to be a safe space, right? So I think if, anybody is abusing an usher, they absolutely should take them out. And if it is repeat occurrence, if it really is a strict mask policy and there is someone who maybe isn't even being super abrasive to the ushers, but is like, I'm absolutely not going to wear a mask. No, thanks. I'm not going to. And I think if the usher, especially if the cast is being like, please, please, please keep masks, I think the usher has every right to file that person out of the theater because they're not operating in the safe space. So again, I feel like I have my one foot with Mack and Ryan here too, right? Of like, there is an awareness of audience etiquette and up here, like adhering to that awareness. But to me, I think there does have to be a line drawn as to who is the one responsible for shutting it down. Mack, sorry, do you want to chat? I realize it's been a while since you've come in on anything.
Yeah, sure. I mean, where do we want to go?
Yeah. We can totally.
If you want to get into the usher question.
Sure. Okay, yeah.
So
this came from an article that I read that up in Scotland, I think it was Mamma Mia on tour. Anyway, some show was on tour that basically and this actually ties into another question we have up here as well, which is there's a line on the poster that says, "The show's so good, you'll be dancing in the aisle." Now, this person took it literally and decided to start dancing in the aisle at an inappropriate time. The usher, who was doing their job, came down to say, you need to stop this and resume your seat, ultimately got yelled at and then got punched in the face by this audience member. So, what response should ushers have to an audience member who are not following the rules? And this is something we're actually talking about right now at my work at Medieval Times. Because we have audience members who come in slightly intoxicated. We have audience members who sneak alcohol in. We have audience members who get a little bit too handsy with the serfs and the wenches. And so we have had to create a protocol list of code lines to say over the radio so our operations manager or our GM or head of event staff can come down and deal with it. Because there are some of our lovely event staff who are 5 foot tall, very nice women who have to go up to these 6 foot tall, inebriated men and tell them to stop being dicks at the show, And they're fully deputized to do that. But I know some of them don't feel comfortable. And I think we've gone to the point where people are so individualistic that they feel they have the right to say what they say to Patti LuPone of, I pay your bill. I pay my money to be here. Ergo, I can act the way I want to act. And it's like the audience member, the usher now has to contend with that. And how do you contend with that? Because Medieval Times is a unique theater where audiences are encouraged to cheer and be loud and raucousy. So, but other shows where you're trying to keep the situation contained, you don't want to disrupt the whole audience, especially if you're up in the back of the balcony or something and the voices are now carrying. Ushers should have every right to remove someone, plain and simple. If you it should basically be like an automatic, if you were caught recording after you've heard the announcement that says do not record, there's no warning that says turn your phone off. You heard the announcement. You are a grown adult. You're not a 4-year-old who is learning the rules of the theater. You are an adult person who can get on an airplane and know, put on my seatbelt and sit on a plane or, follow basic rules of the road. Like the speed limit says this. So I'm going to follow the speed limit. We should all be able to get into a theater and whatever the rules say, and I get it, each theater is going to be different. Pantomimes are going to have one set of rules, which will be, once again, Jill, when I went and saw your wonderful Rapunzel show, it was made very clear to the audience. We want you to actively boo and be raucous and have fun. Lloyd Webber said at the end of Joseph, please don't record during the show, but during the bows when we do our big final dance number, please record and post. 6, the musical, comes out and says, we are a rock concert. Please come out and do that. When you go and see Elton John at the Air Canada Center, it's understood that audience members, because there is no announcement that says do not record. So everybody's out on their phones. You know, like, if people can't follow the rules, you're out. Plain and simple. We learned that as children. If you can't sit quietly in class and listen to your teacher and not be disruptive, you know, you're out. You go sit down in the hall, or you go down to the principal's office. These are rules that are set from I got put on timeout as a child when my parents, I wasn't listening to my parents after a few warnings. But it's like, as an adult, I shouldn't have to be warned. If a rule is clearly stated, like, please do not bring in outside alcohol because it can jeopardize our liquor license, you're out. Please do not record our performers because it can be distracting, and also they have not consented to you recording them. You're breaking that rule, you're out, and the ushers have every right to kick you out. Plain and simple.
Do you mind if I jump onto this?
Yeah,
jump in, Ryan.
Well, because it's again what we were just talking about, is most of the rules that you are describing are either just codified laws that the nation state that is housing the theater has on the books. Even the liquor license one is, this is an establishment that is not licensed for you to bring in your own liquor. Therefore, you are breaking the law by bringing it in there. It's not just about, this is a theater space, we ask you don't drink alcohol because that is not in accordance with the etiquette here. Like, it's same with the, assaulting or the ushers, that you kind of, it's funny because this question, or I guess since you brought it up, we'll kind of show how this bleeds into this, you'll be dancing in the aisles, and Mack, we wrote this question here about, should marketing, theater marketing be changed to subdue the potential unruly audience members? This feels so stupid to me that this is but I'm saying, an unruly person who assaults an usher, that has nothing to do with them wanting to dance in the aisle. These are separate things. And to answer that question, if you genuinely don't want people dancing in the aisle, sure, don't use that particular idiom if you don't mean it sincerely. If you're treating it as pure metaphor, and you can't get mad when people actually do it. Now, that doesn't galvanize that person, or shouldn't galvanize that person to physically assault somebody, regardless of whether or not they are in a theater. But yeah, I think I would love it if I was putting on a show and someone started dancing in the aisle because they were so, having such a fun time. And, if I put it in the marketing, that, I'd be like, whoa, I can't disagree with this. And, maybe it's disruptive, but, I assume they weren't just doing it randomly, haphazardly. It was probably during a musical number that they found interesting.
It was during Mamma Mia, so it's
exactly.
There's a time at the end of the show during the final encore where they reprise Waterloo, Dancing Queen, and Mamma Mia at the end during the bows, and there are many commercial shots from the audience dancing in the seats.
Yeah,
and that's fine, but that is a specified time that we've all agreed to do this.
Back up, how did we all agree only during that one time when the marketing itself is saying you'll be dancing in the aisle? Did they specify in the opening announcements, please turn off your cell phone? If you want a hard candy or lozenge, please take it now, and please do not dance until the very end when we say it's okay. Was that stated in the opening announcements?
Well, when I went and saw Mamma Mia back in the early 2000s, my friend's grandmother took him and I to see the show. We were up in the balcony of the Royal Alex. It was just understood that when the lights went down,
exactly, it's just understood.
And then during the finale, the lights came up a bit more. You could see in front, because it's a safety hazard too. If the lights are down and you're not going to be dancing in the aisle, and you could potentially trip and fall down the stairs and break your neck. Come on, there's a certain level of understanding. It's individualistic. I'm sorry, the individual
but just understood
as a community group.
It's just understood as a slippery slope, because all of these things that we just understand are all things that we learn at some point or another. And if you are somebody who has never had that particular lesson gone to you, maybe because this is your first time in the theater, maybe because you're poor and theater is expensive, I don't blame you for seeing a sign that says you'll be dancing to all these ABBA tunes you love, and then being confused when you're told not to dance. And if they had an announcement at the beginning and then the person says, screw it, I'm dancing regardless, that's one thing, because they're breaching the contract.
Or if they're inebriated. Yeah.
Yes, if they're inebriated, that's one thing, but that's because they're already breaching certain liquor-related laws and or rules and or social ethics that are completely separate from just the injunction not to dance when you have this kind of competing injunction that you will be dancing.
Now, again, I think in this, if we're getting micro with this too, like the usher should have, maybe they did say, hey, listen, I know our sign says you'll be dancing in the seats, like again, hushed tones, but do you mind taking your seat until the end? We love your charisma, we love whatever, but do you mind taking your seat until the end? And then if that person proceeded, maybe this is exactly how this goes, to punch that person in the face, that person's no longer being like, your theater sign said this, and I decided to want to dance. I'm going to punch you because I should be able to dance. No, they're punching that person in the face because they've been publicly embarrassed. And they're now taking this in like, I'm punching you in the face because I feel embarrassed. It has nothing to do with the show.
Punching is wrong. It's not about etiquette. That's, yeah.
But I think this is interesting too. Like, I don't think this is peppered into the question, but I think the idea of audience signs, like the signs this even goes to do with content warning and trigger warning for audiences. That to me is very interesting, an interesting slippery slope as well. Because again, this is maybe opening up a whole other can of worms, but like certain pieces call for certain trigger warnings, certain theaters will list all of the trigger warnings, certain theaters and pieces won't, and they will just put them in the program. So again, I'm using this kind of as a case study of like every single theater and also every single show and also every single audience member and every single actor in these types of situations are going to be different. There's never going to be these are the rules, or this is the way that this theater goes, because that theater might house a show that requires amazing audience interaction, raucousness all the way, but then the next show might be like, you are absolutely not like. So it's this constant, I think at the end of the day, and this sounds like summative of everything that we're going to be talking about, but like there needs to be an awareness of you're in the theater and respect the people around you and the people on stage, like you're saying, Mack, and absolutely don't take it on yourself or in yourself to think, oh, I run this place, I bought a ticket and I'm going to do whatever. No, you're not in your living room. You're not in your own house. You don't get to call the shots. But I think there needs to be this like kind of wiggle room-ish with certain things, because there is never going to be a set exact amount of rules. You know, I think like both the audience and the actor in the case studies we've said throughout this whole conversation have broken that contract, right? Like we've talked about, yes, like a lot of these examples have the audience members absolutely being like, we are the ones that are not following what the protocol is for the show. But even talking about Patti and all these other actors, you've also broken that contract of I'm up here as a vehicle to storytell and I'm not up here as a vehicle to shut you down. I think there needs to be kind of like this middle ground understanding that's like this generic vibe, and then each individual piece can require and will require specific rhetoric of how you want the audience and the actor relationship to go. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to, I guess, jump off of that. I guess if we insist upon having these social contracts around a specific way that this particular piece of art wants to be consumed, because as we've all mentioned many times that different shows will have different expectations, I think it's just a matter of clarity in communicating what that contract is, because it's not a contract if you don't know what you're signing. If it's pure fine print that is not even legible, then it's really not a contract that people are agreeing to. And it comes back to just, who communicated to this person that, the thing about the dancing, don't take it literally, because that looks like a contract that they're like, oh, this is a show where I get to come and dance. I love dancing. And so, and I'm not just saying like specifically this is a very silly instance of like, taking an idiom a little too literally, but if you don't want people to dance, then maybe have that be part of the opening announcements, or have it somewhere in the marketing, just being clear about what the expectations are, because you can't assume that it's all just common sense. Common sense is also something that was invented to police the lower classes, if we want to get granular about it.
I'm going to disagree a bit.
Okay.
I think if you are new to the theater, for example, like say this is your first time out and you've chosen to see Mamma Mia at the Royal Alex, And the poster says you'll be dancing in the aisle. Now, me, as a new person in a new environment, I'm not going to, I wouldn't be the person to suddenly stand up and start dancing in the aisle in the middle of the first act when Dancing Queen comes on.
Oh.
Maybe sit back a minute and wait. I've seen Les Mis in Toronto, and I've seen it in the West End. Now, there's a song at the end of the show called Beggars at the Feast, which is a kind of raucous final send-off to the villains of the show, the Thenardiers. And their number now is raucous and it's fun. And I've been in Toronto where the audience doesn't clap on the beat. Now, when I saw it in London, the audience absolutely did clap on the beat. Now, me not knowing which way to go, because I've seen it both ways, I did not start clapping on the beat in Toronto. I waited to see if anybody else would. And when nobody else did, I didn't automatically start clapping on the beat because I was going to disrupt my fellow audience members. I would wait until the appropriate time to do a thing like that. So I think there should be a common sense assumption of look around you in the space, and if nobody else is dancing in the aisle yet, don't dance in the aisle.
But
wait until the time when there's going to be more people who are going to be doing something similar with you. Read the room.
But that what you're now calling common sense is not really done, in earnest with the thought experiment of I'm a person who's never been to the theater before. You are building this exact thought experiment upon the baggage of your previous theater experience and your own personal self-consciousness about doing something out of step with what everyone else will do, which not everyone will have. And I think,
more people should then.
But, okay, that's your opinion, but I don't think we can call that a blanket rule or a structure of etiquette that everybody must abide by. If I have never been to a theater before, maybe I come from a country that doesn't have the same type of theater that we have in North America, and I see a sign that says you will be dancing in the aisle. Maybe I decided to go to the show because I love to dance, and I have been given this kind of billboard that has told me that this is a place where that's okay, and I'm like, maybe I will give this theater thing a try, because, well, yeah, they're welcome to dancing. This sounds more like the club than the theater, or at least the image of theater I might have in my head, so of course I'm going to go to this show. That person shouldn't be expected to wait and see if other people are dancing, if that is explicitly
Why not, though?
Because then they're having to
sit back and wait and see what the
because
if you're not familiar with
to me that's assimilation. That's assimilation, Mack. That's you're expecting someone to instantly abide by a rule set that they have no idea and they've never been thrown into, and
maybe theater in their country
asking them to conscript to what this idea is. But they don't have any awareness of that. But all three of us, we are coming from the same perspective of that. We have been very aware of what North American etiquette and rules are. We have that privilege, literally, to use the word. Some people don't. And not just saying from other cultures, but also socioeconomic backings. We all grew up in very well-off middle-class families where we all had the experience to go to the theater as a young child, and from the very beginning be ingrained in what is right and wrong in the space. But that's not the case anymore, especially now that theater is becoming more affordable in a way through rush tickets and preview tickets and under 30 tickets. We can't say that everyone is coming. Can people read, coming from the same experience, can people read up on what it is? Sure, but we can't expect that they're gonna do that, and if they don't do that, we can't accost them for it.
Well, hold on a minute here then. So, for example, at my job at Medieval Times before the pandemic, I had to travel to different places. During one of my travels, I went and visited mosques, for example. I've never been in a mosque. I've been to synagogues because I have Jewish friends. I have gone to Catholic church. Now, when I went into the mosque, I met the front desk and I said, I would like to meet with your head person. Can you please tell me is there anything I need to do when I'm coming into your space? And said, well, can you please take your shoes off because we all walk around in bare feet and we don't want the floors getting wet and salty. So if you're new to a situation space and you see on the sign that says you'll be dancing in the aisle, take it upon yourself to ask the usher, when is an appropriate time for me to dance in the aisle? Don't just assume that because you see on a sign that says you'll be dancing in the aisle, that means you get to put upon yourself of when you feel it is appropriate. You're coming into a new space, and just as I would be expected to either ask a question or learn versus me, just try, I could have easily stomped into that mosque with my dirty, wet, salty shoes on and went right into that person's office because I had a meeting with them. But I stopped for a minute and spoke to the front desk and said, what do I need to do? I'm not familiar with your space. What is the rule or the practice?
But
I think that is on the person when they show up at that space.
So
But
that's just common decency and respect.
Here's the thing. Sorry, Jill, you wanted to
just if the sign, like, Mack, I hear what you're saying too. If there was let's say like you asking this desk is like the sign in this situation, right? Like if the sign is saying, please remove your shoes because we don't want you to wear shoes. Or I've also been in a Sikh mosque as well, where I've had to cover my hair and be barefoot. And those again were instructions told to me. So if there's this, again, using the specific sign of you'll be dancing in the aisle, this is something that I can understand it being misunderstood because this is information you're being given.
If there was a sign, if there was a sign at the mosque that said, please take off your shoes upon entry, you're not going to go to the desk and be like, excuse me, when should I take off my shoes? Be like, because the sign is telling you. Treat that as very similar as the sign says you'll be dancing in the aisle. You're like, great, this is a place where I can dance. The sign told me so. That is how the contract has been communicated to me. And I think the mosque, while I get the example you're giving here, a religious space and an artistic space, or a space of entertainment, which, let's be real, a show like Mamma Mia, I'm not saying it's not art, or I don't hold those kinds of opinions at all, but it is a space for entertainment. A lot of people see that as going to a concert or a movie type thing. A lot of people seeing Mamma Mia are probably more familiar with it as a movie than a play, and it's like, oh, this is just like the movie that I've seen. So it's kind of understandable that they're not going to be going in with the same expectations of a religious space that kind of, whether, for better or for worse, does have different strictures of behavior and reverence that you put on. Despite what people say about theater as a sacred space, that is more metaphor than literal in that case.
I think it honestly goes back to, again, and this isn't just me like trying to always play Switzerland. I think by all of us sharing our opinions and uncracking all these questions, I keep coming back to there needs to be this generic understanding, but also like as much as there's audience like hiccups, and we've maybe seen those more frequently, there needs to be more parameters in place for front of house as well, right? Of like, when do you intervene? Maybe this signage was wrong,
it was a marketing sign, like on the poster, like a quote from like a reviewer.
So instead of like berating,
Jillian Robinson says, you'll be dancing in the aisle.
But instead of berating the audience member who doesn't understand that, maybe that's a conversation. The next day, the marketing team gets together and says, let's take down that poster and reword. Let's regroup because that show didn't go well. And for the next show, let's be better at what we want our audiences to do. Similarly with that recording, oh my dear Lord, we cannot have Patti LuPone break the fourth wall and do yet another interruption. What do we need to do to help her and to help our audiences who maybe aren't aware of theater etiquette? Maybe a lot of them are just being negligent, which again is like, don't be an asshole. But like, what can everyone do to lift? But it goes both ways. If people are still not like being cognizant or aware, sure, exit them from the space. Again, as a performer, I don't want people who are at risk of creating other people's tempers and tampering with a show. But I think there's this balancing act, like, because it comes from, if people don't understand, then we need to also on the other side of, how do we figure out how to help them understand? Was it a language thing? Was it, if it was a negligent thing and someone was just being a terrible person, do we allow them back into the theater? Like, I think these are questions that we have to ask. We can't just tell,
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all agree on that, right? Of like,
like if it's a common misunderstanding, that's fine.
Yeah.
But my whole thing is, if you're coming into a new space, don't just assume something. Ask a question. Be active. There was no sign in that mosque that said take off your shoes. So me not being familiar with that space, I asked the front desk, what do I need to do?
Sure.
If you see on a sign that says you'll be dancing in the aisle, take a minute and ask an usher. If it's not specifically spelled out in the pre-show announcement that says, hey, please do not record, and hey, during the show, but hey, record at the end during the finale, and please dance. if it's not specified where, take a minute, ask your usher. Don't just assume you can dance in the aisle because there's a sign on a marketing poster that says as much.
Well, but I guess to use this mosque example again, if there was no sign, I don't think you would be in the wrong if you've never been in a mosque before and don't know the kind of structures of this space. If you had forgotten or didn't realize you were supposed to take your shoes off when you walked in, you can't be blamed for continuing to wear your shoes. Now, if somebody then comes to you and says, could you please take off your shoes? And
don't punch them in the face.
Don't punch them in the face. But once you are informed, you have no excuse not to comply. Yes. But you cannot, if that is not communicated in advance, I wouldn't, you could come from a completely different part of the world that has zero Muslim population, and you might have no idea what a mosque is like, even to the extent that you, Mac, someone who's new to mosques, but maybe has a better idea of what could be expected, does. Like,
it's not even just, it's just, I was always raised up, if you don't know something, ask a question. Whenever I come to somebody's
everybody
house,
was raised that way is the difference. That is part of your privilege that you were raised that way.
Like, if I go into somebody's house, I will ask Jill, if I'm new to your house, would you like me to take my shoes off? You don't have a sign in your front foyer that says, please take your shoes off.
Yes, but you could also, if you grew up in a house where shoes are just kept on all the time, and you don't realize that not everybody lives that way, you can walk into Jill's house with your shoes on, and Jill can say, could you please take your shoes off? And she's not going to be mad that you didn't do it intuitively. She's going to be like, oh, you didn't realize, but now if you then refuse to take your shoes off, she has the right to be mad. Yeah. But did you hear what I just said? That is part of your privilege, that you were raised with that sort of awareness to ask questions. Not everybody has that, and I think it's foolhardy to assume that.
Well, and some people too, if they ask questions, there's severe ramifications for that too, right? Like, especially if you're someone who is new to the theater space and you're like, oh, this is a safe space, and that's maybe something that you're not comfortable with, you might also not be like, you might just be very uncomfortable and navigating that, and like you coming with a checklist of like, I should ask this, ask that, ask this, that might not be on your brain too, right? Like, I just think there needs to be wiggle room. But I think with it, once you are, I think Ryan, you just said this, and Mac, you've definitely backed us up too. Once you are informed of something,
follow the rule.
Like, just abide to that. Abide to that. And if you do break that, like the person recording Patti LuPone as the example we keep bringing up, but like, and yes, you can be exited out of the space because you were told and you didn't follow that. But again, it comes full back to like ethics versus etiquette, right? Of like, you abiding to those rules is you following etiquette and being ethical. You proceeding to continue to record, to ignore someone's consent, or punching someone in the face, that's no longer, you're so far out of etiquette, you're just fully not being ethical. Like, it's interesting. It's like they're married until they're absolutely not, right? Well, like,
I would agree with that, but also even add that it is the fact that they are not intrinsically married is the metric by which we can, measure when something is crossing a line, when it is no longer about etiquette and becomes about ethics or just, conduct. That isn't just, we have all agreed 150 years ago that this is how a theater should be. It's, I think once, that's one thing, and, you can comply with that space or politely ask somebody to comply, but then it steps over into ethics when they're then just doing something that, is unethical, and it's kind of is no longer even about etiquette at that point.
Do we want to mosey forward?
Yeah, we have so many more questions.
We do. So let's segue to, does accessibility change the rules to theater etiquette? Mac, want to just start us off?
Sure.
With that, or your thoughts on that? Yeah. I think accessibility, again, both of you back me up because I know you're the ones that accrued these questions. Are we talking, like, what does accessibility mean in this question?
So this actually came back to Lilith White in Hadestown, where she didn't realize that the person was using a listening device to help them hear the show. So that's kind of where this spawned from. Of in accessible wise, once again, at Medieval Times where I work, one of my jobs is to deal and help people with disabilities come in and see the show, whether that is somebody with autism getting a special discount, I'm helping hire a ASL interpreter so they can watch the show, making sure there are proper notes on the file for somebody who is visually impaired. If they're having a seeing eye dog, making sure they know what paperwork they need to bring with them so we can verify it at the door, that type of thing there. So does accessibility change the rules of theater etiquette? I don't know if it changes it. I just think there's a different understanding. Once again, there's a different set of rules. Like a common audience member who does not have a hearing aid or a hearing device knows to here's the announcement and says, put your phone away. And they should. Now, the person who has the listening device knows, okay, I have to keep my phone out. Now it's on the front of house, which is where this fell apart for Lilith White. The front of house didn't notify her properly that, hey, there's going to be a device that looks like a cell phone, and this person's in the third row, so you're probably going to see them. They're going to be holding it up so they can properly capture the sound. So that's where the issue came about, was the front of house, once again, needs to properly communicate what's going on. It's like me at medieval times. I need to communicate with the operations team with, hey, there is going to be a service dog with this person. Please seat them accordingly to give them extra space so the dog can sit at their feet. And I will make sure that the person who has a service dog knows that the dog cannot sit up at the table with you because we have food. We are a restaurant. The dog must be properly vested. It will have to have the proper paperwork. It will have to be leashed, and it will have to stay at the person's feet. So there is a agreement on both sides of, we're going to accommodate and make sure you have a great experience. And we're also going to make sure that the people around, like around you, or the actors, are going to know what's going on. It's like at Stratford this past summer, I went to see Chicago. At that show, it was clearly labeled as an accessibility for ASL. So we had 2 ASL interpreters at the front of the stage signing the show, and there was actually a spotlight on them. Not a bright spotlight, but a spotlight enough that you could see them. You know, it's the same thing at the movie theater, where there are shows for young mothers or mothers with young children that happen during the day, and they're specified as that. So then I know, as someone who doesn't have children, if I go to see a movie during the day and I get angry and go, well, why are there so many screaming children in strollers all in here? The theater can then go, well, we communicated to you that this show was meant for this, and you chose to come to this, and you bought a ticket for this on the seeing on the website that we had clearly labeled this. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, theater, like front of house, needs to communicate that to the actors. And when that doesn't happen, that's where these issues come up. It's like Mandy Patinkin not knowing that in the first box next to his stage is somebody with a loud breathing machine, which can sound like snoring. So, you know, you're out there on stage performing your heart out, and you got a large snoring sound going. It's gonna be pulling you out. And Mandy Patinkin, thank goodness, didn't do a pull of Patti LuPone and stop the show. But, you know, I can understand his frustration of, I'm trying to perform and I got somebody snoring in my right ear the whole time. It's distracting. But, you know, as long as it's properly communicated, the rules don't have to change. It's just there's a different set of rules that we as a group have set up and followed. There is a SOP that is set up for each situation that is given. Like if somebody has a seeing eye dog, we at Medieval Times have an SOP of, what do I need to do? What do the operations managers team need to do? What does everybody need to do to make sure this person has the best viewing experience possible? You know, and it's an evolving thing. There are things like, for example, we had a situation where emotional support animals, this is the new big thing. We as a company have a license for a restaurant. Emotional support animals are different from AODA certified service animals because they go through different training. Emotional support animal can be anything. It can be your cat, a parrot, a snake. I once had a resident who actually had an emotional support snake living with them in residence. Now, they didn't have the proper paperwork, so the snake had to be removed, you know? But, like, service dogs who are there for seizures, visual impair, that type of thing, go through rigorous training, and therefore they comply with our license for being a restaurant that's serving food, and we're going to have live animals in the space, you know? Like, there are rules that are set up, and we follow the rules as they are specified. It's not changing the rules. It's just, what are the new set of rules that are coming with this certain situation? And everybody needs to be informed properly, so that way then nobody feels that they were out of step. And what happened with Lilith White was unfortunate because she wasn't properly informed. And because of that, she assumed one thing when that wasn't the case. But it's understandable why she would assume it, because if it looks like this in a third row of theater and you're holding this up at me, I don't know what this listening device looks like, and I'm trying to perform. And once again, we've already deliberated the whole, should performers stop the show? There are different things going on there. She clearly felt this person had heard the announcement, they weren't complying. She felt the need to speak out because she felt the ushers were clearly not doing their part protecting her. But once again, it's not changing the accessibility for theater etiquette. It's adapting so each person can properly come in and have a good experience both on stage and off stage. I see Ryan's face.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about everything you said. And for the most part, I agree. But I think maybe a lot of our disagreement comes down to terminology, because change, adapt, evolve, these are synonyms. So if you're saying it's not changing, it's just adapting, or it's not changing, it's evolving, like, I think accessibility is an interesting case study because it is evidence that etiquette can and should change. And I think part of where this comes down to is because etiquette exists as a list of generalities that crumble under the scrutiny of specificity. And for example, you could say that, it's a rule of etiquette that you do not bring a dog into the theater. And someone says, well, what about my, seeing eye dog or my support animal? Well, fine. You can bring that dog into the theater because there's a good reason for that, and we recognize that this rule should be bent or even broken to accommodate that in order to help you in your situation. So it's showing that there are valid exceptions to what we believe to be the rules of etiquette. And, for a long time, those bending and breaking or changing or evolving of the rules would not have been obliged. It's like, no, you don't bring a dog into the theater. I guess you just can't attend the theater. Again, it's about policing people who don't necessarily come from the same position of privilege. And thankfully, we've recognized that we don't all have the same needs and abilities, and that, we are willing to change the rules to accommodate people, to make it more accessible. But it does actually require the active act of breaking or changing or evolving those rules in order to accommodate people who otherwise would have been barred entry from this space. And I think, to go back to this example of, the Mandy Patinkin, the snoring, the Lilith White, the phone thing. Again, this is accessibility presents a very good circumstance or a good justification for why it's not the actor's job, because from where they're standing, they can't be the judge of whether or not what they think they're seeing is actually what it is. And they can, as we've seen, chew out someone who doesn't deserve to be chewed out, all because they misunderstood. And sure, we could say that this is something that needs to be better communicated between front of house and the actors, or the actors could just know, you know what, even if I see a cell phone, it's not my job to do it, leave it to front of house. Or even if I hear someone snoring, it's not my job to tell them, leave it to front of house, because they don't know and they should recognize their own positionality towards that. And I guess with this whole thing of accessibility, it's very funny because, Mack, when you first had your Shark is Broken experience and pitched this premise for an episode, it was the day after I had just had a conversation with a friend and colleague of mine about something that it was just sort of like an interesting discussion we were having about a current protocol at Tarragon Theatre right now is that before every show, where they would usually have the announcement that's please turn off your cell phones, as is kind of customary with a lot of theater shows, Tarragon has recently started saying, because everybody has different accessibility needs, we will not be telling you to turn off your cell phone. If you can, please put it on silent, etc., etc. If you've been to Tarragon recently, you've heard this spiel. Mm-hmm. But, the conversation was interesting because my friend was saying that, he was kind of going against this idea of the rhetoric of the announcement itself, maybe putting on a bit of a performative wokeness that rubbed my friend the wrong way, that he was suggesting that you could, in a world of material consequences, you could just not make the announcement whatsoever and it would have the exact same result of just not telling people who need their devices for accessibility purposes, it's okay, you don't have to turn it off, without needing to, publicly say, we at Tarragon are so in tune with everybody's accessibility needs that, you know what, we're not going to do the usual thing. And my friend was kind of, rubbed the wrong way about the performativeness. And while I do agree with that perspective, it actually might have never occurred to me personally, someone who, is not disabled and is kind of privileged to not have to think about these things very often. It might have never occurred to me that some people do need their devices for accessibility purposes in the way that is no longer being barred at Tarragon Theatre specifically. And it is only because I have heard this particular announcement and now had this conversation with my friend that I've actually rethought that, oh yeah, maybe something that I would have otherwise said should just be a blanket, yes, turn off your phone, it's the way to behave in the theater. Hearing this very performative announcement has prompted me to rethink something that I might have not thought of otherwise. So I do actually see a material benefit to making this, admittedly performative, self-congratulatory announcement of, look how progressive we are for not making the usual announcement. But I do think there is value in this re-education process that informing the general audience who might not think about these things that this is something that they should think about. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what I said at the very beginning about maybe we should be rethinking what theater etiquette means or why we have these structures and are these still useful, and our willingness to adapt or evolve these structures to accommodate people with disabilities is, I just, the best case example for why we do need to do this labor of rethinking.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick up what you're putting down too. And also, Mack, like all of the insight you have from medieval times is lovely. Like for me, I didn't even think that there is so many nooks and crannies of accessibility now, right? And what I love hearing you say all that is that each individual is being, their disability or accessible need is being, mapped out in a document. So team members know, cast members know. I love that system. And I think more establishments should have that, especially because I think, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic and mental health is at an all-time low right now, there's going to be different types of accessibility needs as we go on as well, right? And so I think with that, things are going to have to change. Like, maybe a couple weeks from now or months or a year or whatever, Mack, there is a whole other document or sector of emotional support animals, right? And so there's things of like definitely there, it's already changing. And I think what all of us are saying too is, and especially this is me now speaking as performer, I would like to know what is going on. And that doesn't mean like, I don't need to know specifically where a person is sitting, but like, I think there does need to be communication, if there can be, in advance of like, hey, just so you know, we have a group of, it's a school show and we have a group of autistic kids sitting audience left. So if you do hear any outbursts or, reactions, different things like that, just letting you know that might happen today. Or like, we have a whole row of service dogs here today that are, honestly, when we mentioned that, I was thinking of how cute it is that Stratford actually has audiences where it's just service dogs. That's part of their training. But like, let's say these, this is an anecdote, but like these service dogs are like almost ready and there's 7 of them that are now integrated in a real live audience. Okay. So like, as the performer, this is a normal audience, but I know that row G is going to have a bunch of canines and there might be a bark or there might be, I would love to know that. And I think that's another thing of communication. There needs to, again, not be this system. The theater operates because every person who is in that building is a part of the show. Like we need the audience needs performers, the performers need front of house, the audience need front of house. We need the janitorial staff to supply the toilet paper. Like there needs to be this blanket of communication that I feel like needs to be, communicated. But guess what? In anything that's evolving and re-educating and there's going to be parties that aren't aware or that aren't going to know. And it's okay that they don't know. And it's a mistake. And collectively, how do you go from there? Right? How do you make sure that everybody is satisfied? And if it gets to a point where they're not, right? Like, let's say even from talking from an audience member who has an accessibility that they don't like the way that the theater is operating under it, or they don't like their, a theater, for example, Witchwood Theater. We have designated like the front row for any patrons that want to be in a wheelchair. That's where they will sit. They'll either sit far audience left or far audience right, just because that's where we know that there's space for them and they can see the show. But if for some reason that audience member wants a higher up view, but there's no ramp in place at Witchwood Theater can't accommodate them in that way. So that audience member can be like, okay, I'm not coming. I want to get it back. You know what I mean? Or it comes down to communication and being like willing to hear both sides of the story. Right. And when either side is being pushed, then yes, exit the premises. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think too, like, again, using Patti, LOL, I love you, Patti, but I feel like I'm going in on you in this episode. But like, I honestly, if I was Patti LuPone's front of house manager and she was told also like, Patti, they got this. I understand if it was like 3 times and they didn't get that, then sure, maybe there's a little bit of mistrust there and that's something to be communicated. But if she continued to do that, I would be royally pissed. I'd be like, you need to trust that I have a job too. It's not just your show. You don't own the space because it's your voice and body that is on the stage, right? I think there's like this ownership that comes from the audience, that comes from the actor, that maybe comes from an overactive usher, that nobody owns anything. We're all doing this thing together. And newsflash, lo and behold, the big bad pandemic showed us that if one thing is not there, the entire establishment or system, if you will, falls apart. You can't do a show without ushers. You can't do a live show without an audience. You can't do a show without performers, because then it's not a show. You can't do a show without a stage manager. You can't ensure the cleanliness and or whatever of a show without the janitorial staff, right? There needs to be this like universal understanding. I feel like this kind of has to do with etiquette still. I feel like I'm a little bit soapboxing in the theater itself, but like it just, and if there is a misunderstanding, communication is key. Communication is key. Kindness is key. And there's no hierarchy. That's where I'm going to mic drop.
Cool. I love that mic drop. That's great. Jill, I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned about the communication specifically. And this does go to what Mack, you were saying about the way people communicate certain disability or accessibility needs to you at medieval times. Because I think as an ideal, that makes sense and is great. And that would be a good thing to put forward. But practically speaking, it's not necessarily, you can't trust that everybody with an accessibility need will voice that, or maybe somebody who's not even demanding any accessibility needs, but just take, for example, somebody who has autism and doesn't...
Oh, I have a story about this.
Okay, so I'll let you do that in a minute, but somebody with autism who maybe doesn't need any special accessibility requirements, but maybe just, out of due to forces outside of themselves, will, have a moment where they might briefly disrupt the performance, out of things that you cannot control. It wasn't something that they felt the need to, just so you know, I have autism, this might happen. They couldn't have predicted that it was going to happen in this moment. If you sitting next to that person who don't know anything about this person get mad that person has made a disruption, when you find out that person has autism, you will instantly feel bad for getting mad about that. I think we can all agree, just general sense of human decency. You'd be like, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, and, I apologize that I, maybe you say something rude to them about, like, will you please be quiet, and you didn't realize it was out of their hands. If you're willing to make that allowance for somebody with a disability, why can't you make that same allowance for anybody? Like, I think accessibility and the rhetoric around accessibility and disability, if it's just an invitation for generosity, if we are willing to have or willing to accept that our experience might be disrupted because somebody has specific needs, even if those needs are not communicated to us, why can't we just maybe not jump to conclusions that you don't have a good reason for making this disruption, or you don't, because if we're if we're open to finding out that maybe they do have a good reason, we shouldn't have to hear that reason to find out that, oh, it's okay. Just be generous in the assumptions you do or do not make about other people. And if we're willing to do that, then maybe we can dissolve a lot of these, rigid boundaries of what we consider to be good or proper etiquette. What's your story, Mack?
So, I do agree that people should be generous and understanding. However, so one of the things I deal with frequently is people with autism and, special needs like that, those type of neurodivergent disabilities. So we had a person who brought their child to the show, and this child who had some type of disability was triggered by loud noises. Now you can imagine being in a 800-seat arena with trumpets blaring. So this woman called me to voice her frustration because she said we did not properly identify that we are a loud space. Now this woman never called, but when this person brought their child to the show, the minute the show started, the thunder went off and the horns went off. The child decided to then start flipping all the plates and the hot bowls of soup, spilling it over their surrounding people. At that point, our event staff came down, said, "We're so sorry about this. We will move you to a spot that's a little bit quieter." They then moved this person. And this person, or this child, then got triggered again, and this time started throwing potatoes and actually hit somebody in the back of the head during the show. At that point, we had to ask them to leave. Now, to me, because I deal with a lot of people all the time, I get a lot of calls from people going, "My child is triggered by this. My child has seizures due to strobe lighting. I see you have strobe lighting listed on your website. I've seen the photos and the videos of your space. Would you recommend this space for my child with these needs?" This person who just assumed that I can bring my child, it's great, and didn't call knowing that their child was triggered by loud noises, then got angry at us and demanded a refund. When we said, no, you paid for the show, you didn't specify ahead of time or didn't ask ahead of time. We tried to accommodate you, and when you actually assaulted somebody else with a potato, we had to ask you to leave. And you also disrupted people around you by flipping over hot bowls of soup and spilling it in other people's laps. So we had to comp other people in the audience who were disrupted by you. So I do think generosity is there, but I also think it is upon, once again, you're going into a space, don't just assume something. Take the chance, take the time to, if you have a question, ask the question. Don't just assume that, assumptions make an asset of you and me. If I'm going into a space and I know I have someone who is triggered by loud noises, that's not fair to me to assume the space is okay and then put that person in a bad position. If they have a disability and need to be accommodated, it's my job as the support person to make sure that my person's needs are taken care of. So I do agree, Ryan, generosity and understanding is key, but I also think it is important that in order to be properly accommodated and helped with your accessibility needs, you also do need to call in and ask. Like today I had someone call in and say, "Do you provide listening devices? Because I am hard of hearing." I had to say, "No, we do not provide listening devices, but I can absolutely put a note on the file saying we will seat you close to a speaker so you can have a bit more sound provided for you." It's one of those things where it's generous, but also there needs to be, once again, communication. Communicate your needs. Don't just assume everything's going to work out magically for you because you just show up and assume it's going to work. If you have a need, please communicate your need or your question, and the front of house will do their due diligence and will make sure everything's communicated to you so you can have the best experience possible.
So I guess to this story, while I agree it seems silly that this parent wouldn't take that initiative and do those things and just saw, oh, it doesn't say anything about loud noises on the website and just assumed that absence of evidence is evidence of absence of this particular instance. I would assume, though, just in the spirit of communication and communication being a two-way street, if you, Mack, as medieval times, have something on your website that specifies strobe light that may cause seizures, but don't have something about loud noises, you might have thought that it seems like common sense that there will be loud noises. Clearly it wasn't common sense because somebody didn't intuit it. I imagine the next day you put underneath strobe lights.
Yeah, our corporate office now put that on there, so that
exactly
that covers it. But it's don't just assume.
So
like if you have a question, ask me a question.
Yes, but while I agree that parent could have taken more initiative and it would have been better for everybody, including their child, if they had taken more initiative. It's at the end of the day, you realize that there is a lapse in our half of the contract that needs to be filled, and you did that. You can only do so much for communication, and in the spirit of adapting and evolving and bending and breaking the rules, we realize as different experiences present different circumstances with us that this contract and the etiquette that it confers does need to be changed accordingly in order to better communicate these things.
Absolutely.
And also to add to, go ahead, Mac.
No. I was just going to say, absolutely. Better communication allows us to then spot the holes or the loopholes so we can properly fix those and make sure that everybody has the proper things that they need to make sure it's the best.
But the onus of that communication... The onus of that communication is a two-way street.
I was just about to say that. So I want to put my input in here is, yes, like it's a two-way street. And at the end of the day, and this doesn't just have to do with theater, it has to do with customer service, right? Like we live in a society where the customer is always right. Like that is just something that is just known in customer service. Like if you are put up with something, the customer is always right. I don't agree with that because I'm like, okay, no, there's a two-way contract. It's a person eating the food and a person serving the food. They're under the same roof. There needs to not be that. There should be communication to prevent that from happening. So in Mack's specific story, Mack changed the rhetoric, which lovely going forward. We've learned in that experience that needs to be there. But that parent has no right to ask for a refund. Because you read the rules, you did call, you brought your child knowing what the protocol was. Is it unfortunate that circumstances happened? Yes, it's unfortunate for everyone, especially the child. The child, most of all, is disrupted so much so to throw a potato. That is something, neither of us can even be in those shoes. But it doesn't, the parent has no right to be like, we were ushered out, therefore don't give me a ticket. I think the parent knowing that they're bringing their child to this new experience also needs to be aware that this might not be an experience that the child can handle. For instance, when I used to babysit frequently, when I was a teenager, I babysat for this one particular family, and I took the little girl, just her and I, to see Finding Dory. But she was 4 years old. It was really cute. 4 years old, and she loved watching movies and loved Disney. And so I was like, I had the parents' consent to take her to the movies. I put her in her booster chair and we went. And we got through 15 minutes of the movie. And then she looked up at me and was like, I don't want to be here anymore. This is kind of boring. So I'm not going to be like, we paid for your ticket. You're going to sit there. First of all, I'm not the child's parent. Second of all, that's terrible parenting skills in my opinion. But like the child is like, I don't feel well. Please take me out of the situation, and can voice that. Absolutely acknowledge the child. But I didn't go up to, as we kind of walked out, and it was a matinee performance. So like these theaters are very dry at that time, right? Yeah. There's not usually patrons around waiting in lines for other evening shows. So the person operating the desk, lovely person, ticket taker, was like, oh, is everything okay? What's wrong? I was like, yeah, it's fine. She just was getting bored. And I think this was just an experience that was a little bit too much for her. And they're like, oh my gosh, can we reimburse your tickets? Like, and I said, no, you don't need to reimburse our tickets because this was my choice to bring. She had fun the moments that she couldn't stop talking about, the moments she did see, but she wanted to leave. And yes, I could have in that moment say, you know what? Yeah, I'm a high school student and I don't make a lot of cash. I wouldn't mind. I mean, the parent gave me money to go to the movies, but like, I wouldn't mind. This isn't my money, right? I wouldn't mind getting the money back to give to my employer. But I also, I guess, I knew that they wouldn't mind that we only stayed for 15 minutes of the movie and paid a full ticket. But I did have that moment of, I could have been like, please reimburse me. But if I walked by and I didn't get that option, it's not, I can ask and be like, hey, can I get, but if they say, well, no, like, unfortunately we have a protocol, then like, I don't, like it's.
Respect the protocol. Yeah. You have to respect it.
But maybe down the line, the movie theater in that circumstance is like, okay, we need to maybe have a ticket policy of like, if you stay past this point, or children under this age don't like, it's a realizing something isn't gelling, and what do both parties need to do to make the next step better? Because there's always going to be worse steps, right? There's always going to be, this didn't work. It has been working for X amount of years and in X amount of ways, but oops, there's a hiccup, there's a nick. Okay, how do we regroup? How do we re-educate, right?
Exactly.
So segueing us to kind of our last-ish topic, even though as this conversation is dictated, we can go on and on and on. And I hope we do go on and on and on, because things will change and evolve and opinions will have pros and cons. But segueing, we are kind of already on the topic of children. One of our final questions here is, should there be age restrictions for young children attending productions intended for mature audiences? And this is an interesting one. I think, if it's okay, I might kick us off.
As a children's entertainer, go for it.
As a children's entertainer, I don't have too much to say, because like I said, a lot of my audiences are babies, or the oldest person is a guardian or grown-up who is monitoring the kids in space. But of course, those productions, there is an age kind of plastered on the poster, and it really is family-oriented or projected as family-friendly. So not necessarily for mature audiences. This one is interesting because I feel like the idea of what is considered a mature piece or a piece for mature audiences has changed, simply because also our youth is exposed to a lot of mature, quote unquote, content at varying degrees and through varying ways, whether it be like something you see in your phone or something that you discuss with your peers openly, because certain societal topics are a lot more open to discussion. I think it's the onus on the company to disclose if you know you're doing a mature content piece, even if that is just swearing, that's like the most mature content you have. Or if there is, it can be the total opposite end of the spectrum of like, there's active rape happening on stage. That could be a trigger warning, right? A mature content thing, that's the extreme. It's up to the company to disclose that information. If it's going to be, if the child is like a baby or a child who's going to make sounds in a mature audience piece, that might be, I wouldn't say like don't restrict them, but I think that follows into the same category of like, hey, we have a new mom who really wanted to see August Osage County today, and she has a newborn in the front row. She might have to leave and go, and the baby might make a sound. I think like, I wouldn't necessarily turn that woman away. I think that's a specific situation. But I think it's really up to the company to post on all of their marketing things. And even at the theater, if you see a minor, you audibly say, the usher and the front of house audibly reiterates, I don't care if it's in your program or it's on your signs, as person to person, you say, just as a reminder, I'm sure you read in our program or you see our signs, but there are a lot of content warnings. There's substance abuse, there's swearing. Totally great that you're here, but I want to make you aware, because maybe a parent didn't notice that, or maybe the child is not comfortable being there. And that's another thing too and I've also learned this through being an elf at the distillery district. If a parent is pressing for a child to have a picture with the character, but as the character, you notice that the child is very scared and doesn't want to be there, we are trained to pivot so that they don't have to take a picture with us. They say, oh, we can do a fun dance instead, right? I think it's also up to the theater to pick up on those situations. It's a tricky coin to toss. And I guess also because I don't know at what level now a 2023 kid is at maturely. Like, did you learn about the birds and the bees when you were 6 years old? Or do you not have any idea what that is? It's up to the parent to kind of navigate that. I feel like I'm giving a lot of thought
No,
points, but
I'm happy to jump on that because I don't feel like I have a lot of experience with this enough that I have big opinions about this in particular. But I do think, in general, like we see with film, what's the acronym of the body that does the rating? Yeah, the rating system, the AC, whatever. Blah, blah, blah.
The PTA, whatever it's called.
Yeah, and like we see how that system kind of just doesn't work. It creates sort of arbitrary standards for what is or is not a certain tier of maturity. And a lot of it's silly, and teenagers are probably better suited to seeing R-rated films than some adults, and that's okay. And I think it's reasonable to just assess maturity on a case-by-case basis. Mac, you said you saw Les Mis at age 4. You were clearly mature enough to experience that show. Maybe you didn't. Maybe little 4-year-old Mac didn't understand everything that he saw, but you weren't a disruptance to the people.
No, I was not.
Your parents knew that you wouldn't be, so you could be trusted to just be a participant in this experience. And, they knew that you weren't going to be, disturbed by seeing poor little Gavroche get shot, and you'd be like, oh, no, wait, that's me. Because, as you probably would have thought in this experience. But yeah, I think, it's up to at least the parents when their children are at a certain age to, know their own child and assess the maturity level. I think, Jill, what you said, it's great that the front of house staff make sure that they are reiterating things and then leaving it to the parents to be like, yes, I know my child, they can handle it. I think maturity as a concept is pretty bunk as a quantifiable metric that we can come up with blanket ratings or restrictions based upon. Every child will be different, and it's kind of just up to the parents and eventually up to the children themselves to know what they can or can't handle.
And the systemic definition of maturity has, like you're saying, Ryan, it used to absolutely be like, oh, you're a mature child, I can count the 5 ways in which you're mature on my hand. But because media has in the click of a button or the tap of a finger can change a person's maturity regardless of your age, but especially kids and teenagers, there's no again systemic way of are you mature or not mature.
And if we assess mature content as, oh, there's swearing in the show, maybe that child is in a household where their parents just swear all the time, and that's not abnormal to them. So to say you can't see this show because somebody drops an F-bomb, the child would be like, well, why the fuck should that stop me, says this child. and whether you personally think it's wrong that the parents speak that way to their child or that the child knows these words at such a young age is kind of irrelevant to, is the child equipped to see this show? Will they be disturbed by this show? And in a lot of cases, you cannot assume that your personal standards will be an effective judge of that.
I guess too. Sorry, Mac. Sorry, but one example, because I went to see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child a couple months back, and this is such an interesting play to kind of chat about because the special effects in that show. No spoilers, but everyone probably already knows this. It's been going on so long now, but the special effects of that show are real as fuck, to use another swear word in our episode. Beautifully real, to the point where you feel like when they are at Hogwarts, you are at Hogwarts. When they are underwater, you are underwater. But also when those Dementors come from the ceiling and literally get right up in the balcony's face, you have no way of preparing a child for that. You can tell them that, listen, there might be some spooky things. The theater's going to go dark and you're going to see words all over the wall. Ryan, I'm totally spoiling if you wanted to see the show.
I don't really want to see the transphobic show, but go ahead.
True. But with the Dementors, that is it. I even was like, whoa, this is very spooky. And, until the kid sees it, you're not going to know how they're going to react. Right? Until you bring a child to an experience, you can prep them as much as you want, but you don't know what's going to set them off or make them feel scared. The only thing that you can do as the parent, and then in this circumstance, all of us would be in current moment as a front of house person or a theater representative, is create that nourishing space of, we've prepared you, but we know there might be hiccups that happen along the way. That's just working with kids in general, right? They just don't have the experience and even the ability to know how they themselves are going to react to new situations. And it's up to the adult who's responsible for them and the
Mhm.
adult who's running the theater space to try to make that as nourishing a
Mhm.
space as possible.
Mhm.
Even if the parent unfortunately maybe does bring their 3-year-old to August Osage County and the 3-year-old is like, I don't like when they crash plates, or like they're swearing a lot. Like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like, it's like
Mhm.
okay, maybe the parent didn't know they were going to react that way. Also, the
Mhm.
front of house is probably like, I don't know why you're bringing a 3-year-old to the show, but maybe you need to get out of the house
Mhm.
because you've been with that 3-year-old every single day and you're going
Mhm.
to lose your mind. You just want to see some good theater.
Mhm.
You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like, again, it's a case by case basis thing, but go ahead, Mac.
Mhm. So, should there be age restrictions for young children attending productions intended for mature audiences? Yes, somewhat, to a certain degree. So, for example, Ryan brought up my parents brought me to see Les Mis when I was 4. Now that show doesn't really have like it has mature things, but things that
A
will go over
child
a
gets
child.
shot, and
Yeah, and my parents said that was the one part where you got a little jumpy in your booster seat, and we had to kind of put our hand on your leg to kind of make you calm down again. But like Fontaine getting assaulted by Monsieur Batamois, that goes over my head. I didn't understand what was going on in that scene. I just like looking at the picture of all the prostitutes in the program. To me, that was like, woo, great, fun. You know,
lovely ladies.
lovely ladies. I sang
Okay.
that song a lot as a kid, not knowing what it meant. You know, it's like my parents let me watch Titanic as a 3-year-old. They knew I couldn't handle the seeing people die in the ocean, but they didn't care that I saw Kate Winslet take her top off. You know, so like, but like when it comes to certain things, like Titus Andronicus, there absolutely should be an age restriction of who gets brought into that show, because that is a very disturbing and graphic play where you have people having their hands chopped off. There is a rape where they ultimately chop off Lavinia's hands and tongue. Like people get baked into pies. It's a very violent
Spoiler
play.
alert for Titus Andronicus.
So, I know, very old play. Or, you know, Spring Awakening had an age restriction on it. Because, you know, there is scenes of nudity as well as assault and sexual violence, you know, abortion and death, that type of thing. It's a very mature show. So audiences rightfully restricted because there are certain things that once again, for me, I'm all about like once again, individual versus the larger group. If it's Les Mis and there's nothing that's really going to be disturbing, that's fine.
But
Don't put an interest.
gun
Put a
and
warning.
warfare
Yeah.
can be very disturbing.
And just
Like,
because you are kind of fine with it, who's to say that's a place where the line should
like
or
I
should
know,
not be
like
drawn?
my sister-in-law and my brother are very against showing clips with guns in
Mhm.
like shows and like.
Like
And
Looney
I
Tunes.
know, like I also saw Les Mis as a little kid, and even seeing like the barricade of upside down furniture, that was freaky as fuck for me. I was like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
That things are upside down and in
Mhm.
such disarray, and
Mhm.
people are literally starving for their lives.
Mhm.
Like, I think there's also varying degrees of what people see as mature and
Mhm.
not mature. Like,
And I guess something I would like to add to that is because there aren't necessarily clear or rigid ideas of what
Mhm.
constitutes the line whereby something becomes mature, bad people can weaponize that ambiguity to very nefarious purposes, as we see with like the Don't Say Gay bill in the States and the, you know, drag story hour being canceled by people who think that any exposure to queer people is inappropriate to children. And, you know, in the absence of clear dividing lines, and by just saying that if something is inappropriate, we will have a restriction, we are opening these things to be vulnerable to these agendas that will force their political ideas on what constitutes appropriate or inappropriate or worthy of being restricted. So I feel like instead of having easily exploitable restrictions themselves, it's more just about, Jill, what you were saying, communicating the specifics and letting individual parents and later individual spectators, older children, kind of decide what they feel they are, you know, what is or is not appropriate to them.
I think also like policing a musical like Spring Awakening is absolutely wrong because
it's
like
about children and growing up.
it's about children and growing up and
To a
being
certain extent,
proctored
though,
by
like
adults. And like, what are we to say? You know, we don't know if there is a 13-year-old in the audience who has been molested by their parent and maybe can relate to Marta
but
going
that's a
off.
13-year-old, not a 4-year-old.
But again, it's up to the parent's discretion. Like if a parent is super, super pro everything, which parents are entitled to be that way, or maybe not be so much that way. If they decide that they want their child to see something like that, then that's up to them.
And if the child has a bad reaction to it, that's that parent's own problem when they get that child home and have to console it, or get the child out of the theater and have to console it in the lobby.
Yeah, but now the child's acting up and disrupting the whole audience. It's now affecting the whole group, not just parent and child.
Like, that's if the child acts up, but yeah.
That's if the child acts up, but there are certain things that I think we all can agree, unless you're in the comfort of your own home. Like my parents showed my sister at 6 years old Hotel Rwanda. They did not take her to the movie theater to see that. We did it at home on our couch so we could pause the movie and talk about the historical implications of what was happening on screen. You know, a parent controls that, but if a movie theater saw my mother bringing in a 6-year-old to Hotel Rwanda, there would absolutely be some questions asked of, do you understand what is going on? The same
questions Jill just suggested that the front of house should ask, but shouldn't then take the answers to that as a basis for restriction, I think is where we're landing here.
I think also with the musical,
if you understand what the like some people may not understand what the subject is. Some people may go, Spring Awakening, that sounds like a happy musical about spring. They may not know anything about it. It's on the job of the producer to go, in order to preserve the whole audience, let's set up some basic guidelines of a 4-year-old should not be, like 4 and under, should not be coming into a show that's going to have this going on, that we know for a majority of people are going to be upset by this.
Okay, so I would also say, if you're going to do that, you have to do that with everything. You have to do that with Les Mis. Because there are situations, depending on what the blocking is, there's situations where it's very much implied. You don't have to be an adult to know that Fantine gets sexually assaulted. You know, you don't have to be an adult to know that there's gunfire, and you're being, just because you don't see it, you see people flopping over the barricade and literally being death by gunfire. These are all themes that, including sexuality and orientation too, which kids maybe aren't as exposed to until pubescence or whatever. These are still themes to put they can be just as detrimental, if not, or more, needing more warning for. I think you have to, if you're going to say you have to put some age restrictions on shows, you have to do that for everything that's deemed like an adult show.
And then if the Republican governor of your state decides that having gay people in it is something inappropriate, then how do you make the moral argument that no, that's something that we allow? Like, obviously you should make that moral argument, but I think the best way to defend ourselves against overabundance of unnecessary restrictions and even nefarious restrictions is just to have no restrictions and just better communicate, as we've all been saying this whole time, the specifics. Content warnings, I think, is what we're advocating for here. Very clear, unmissable content warnings. So if somebody thinks this sounds like a fun show about awakening in the springtime, and then they find out that there's rape and abortion in it, then they might think twice about bringing their kid to it. But at the end of the day, Mac, I think a lot of what you're saying, it becomes fuzzy whether we're talking about protecting the child from being exposed to things that might upset them versus protecting the rest of the audience for the fact that a child might cry and it'll disturb their experience of the show. Because if the child may or may not be fine during this show, and maybe they won't be okay, maybe they'll have a similar experience to the Finding Dory one that you mentioned, Jill, and you do just have to discreetly get a child who may or may not be crying out of the theater. It's a minor blip in the experience. It's so much worse for that child than it is for the annoyed people around them who are like, ugh, a baby, the youngest of our species, is sad. Well, now my experience of this play is ruined, you know? Because I don't think that's the same argument as basing it on what's right for the child, and recognizing that distinction is important to deciding where we do or do not draw these lines.
I think companies have every right to say infants aren't allowed. I think companies have every right to say children under the age of 2, we don't want in this performance, or like this, like that, from like a crying, literally a baby where they absolutely, the only language they know is crying. Like, I think a theater has a right to say, please don't allow babies into a performance. But I think like beyond the age, like you said, Mac, like you had the opportunity to go to the theater as a 4-year-old and
Yeah,
your
of course,
parents
yeah.
brought you to the Les Mis. Like, I think it's like 3 years old and up. Like, you can go to anything you want to go to. Like, you can go to anything that your parents are allowing you to go to. The theater has no right to put age or like orientative, I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm saying it today, restrictions on pieces simply because they think in their minds it's too mature content for children. I'm going to say that again because it's really important to everyone to hear that. The company has no right to say something is too mature because their brains think that it's too mature. It's up to the audience seeing it to make that decision. But if we do bubble into, okay, now this child is being disruptive, the usher has every right to say, hi, excuse me, can you just make sure like your child is a bit quieter? And if it's not, and it gets more raucous, then again, that conversation is had, that communication is had. Excuse me, can you please exit? You're causing like a vocal disruption to the other people. Not, excuse me, can you please exit because, you know, you brought this child in and it's, you know, good. It's your fault for having a child come to this. Like it's, yeah, like you can't proctor someone else's experience for them, you know, like.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah. I also like, and I didn't say that twice because of this panel, because I feel like we're all on the same page of this, but the idea of drag story time and drag performances and drag performers feeling literally like their lives are at risk because there is a small group of people that think it is not appropriate for other people's children. You do not have ownership over other people. You do not have ownership over performances, bodies, and what they do. You can have a communication and state your needs, but that is not like endpoint. Therefore, we're now protesting and putting people's lives in danger.
Yeah,
like,
don't take your kid to drag story hour if that bothers you so much, but don't shut down the event for everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You don't have to take your child to that library to hear a drag queen read, you know, fairy tales, but you cannot blockade that from other people wanting that experience for themselves and for their child. I realize that's a tiny tangent, but it's very topical, and I
think it's
needed
a good,
to say
similar
that.
to accessibility, changing the way we think about the rules of etiquette. I think this is a good, pretty topical, recent example that changes the rules about how we should or should not view age restrictions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, we've been going at this for quite a while. And at the end of the day, like, I know this has become a very, perhaps sometimes intense discussion with a lot of disagreement. This is all kind of in this, you know, good spirit of debate and discourse. We're not really trying to change each other's minds about things we disagree about. We don't necessarily expect that we will, but we're putting forward our ideas, and maybe people will get in the comments and tell us what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Do you have a perspective we haven't considered? We would really love to hear all of this stuff and recognize that the importance of having these conversations is a big step towards rethinking the things we want to rethink, or reifying the importance of things that we do think are important for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
Yeah.
Mac, do you have any final comments? I feel like this started out on audience etiquette, and newsflash, audience etiquette in 2023 is political.
It's complicated.
We're talking about
it is
all,
complicated,
and it's frustrated, and other people are going to have other opinions. We listen and we communicate. That's that was a core thesis statement of today.
Absolutely. I don't know much more I have to say. I mean, I've made my points very clear. I think, like as I said, like I think there should be certain age restrictions put in place. Like for example, when Mary Poppins came out in the West End, Karen McIntosh specifically made a rule: children 3 and under cannot attend the show because there are scary materials that will upset the children. If the parents do show up with a 3-year-old, they are to be given a full refund. And please explain to them that this is not the movie. We have very scary scenes with scary characters who will upset your children. We apologize for you not knowing this. Here is a
that just seems
refund
wrong to presume that it will scare your children. you could say it's likely to and communicate that likeliness, but let the parent decide, I think my kid can handle it.
But they already knew because they did the previews out of town, and repeatedly there were young children brought and they kept crying, which disrupted other people. So now there's other people complaining to the front of house going,
same. No child is the same, and no child's rearing is the same, right? Yes. So it's kind of, again, this is a drastic comparison, but like, just because there were 4 kids in a drag story time that asked too many questions and were too raucous about it, doesn't now mean, okay, we can't even have the next drag story time because those children, like, judged based on those 4 children having those, outworldly or like out loud experiences. You can't ban people from doing things.
And I guess the question,
but you're not banning them. You're just saying, hey, I've got 3 and under child. This is going to scare them. There are other pantomimes. There are other shows available that I'm producing. There are other options for you. It's like taking a child to a 8 o'clock movie versus the Mothers in Strollers movie. Like, things are communicated, and either way.
But then it's like, it's like your kid can only see Matilda. It can't go see Priscilla. Like, you know what I mean? Then we're literally segregating our audiences. Like,
but there's nothing in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, that's going to trigger audiences. It's
literally half of the cast is in drag.
But that's nothing that should be censored.
Yes, we all agree that.
We all agree that. But I'm saying,
if we had a 4th person on this panel who disagreed with that stance, would we just concede to their opinion?
No, because that's like censoring like sexual orientation and performances. This is content where we know, hey, this is scary, or hey, this is really mature. Instead of creating a problem for you where you got to now get a refund and everything else.
But the bigot makes the same argument. How do we empirically refute them? Beyond just that we disagree, it's better to just not have restrictions to bulwark against that than to just say our morality is better than yours, shoo shoo.
Yeah, like I hear what you're saying, Mac, of like, there are certain themes and intense themes in theater that, especially if a piece is going to go all at it, it probably, for most of the child population coming to see that show, is going to make them feel uncomfortable and is going to make them scared. But there might be 10% of those kids that might not be scared by that. Their experience, their rearing is very, used to domestic violence, right? Or like, so I just think it's hard to assume that everybody has the same restrictive vocabulary, if that makes sense. Like,
I also just want to add that if you're producing a show about Mary Poppins, which is based on a children's book and a children's movie, even if, yes, I, as an adaptation theorist, agree that you don't have to be faithful to the spirit of the original, you gotta recognize that people are gonna want to take their kids to that. Like, do a different show if you want to do something that's going to be inappropriate for the little ones. Don't do something that is whose brand is recognizably kid-friendly. That just seems wrong-headed to me. And that's completely separate from the discussion we're having. But it just feels like a very strange example to be the one.
No, but it's also being cognizant of who your audience is, right? Like when I did Rapunzel, there at the end of Act 1 into Act 2, Rapunzel has this hormonal moment, which I'm calling it that because me playing her, I thought about that when this was happening, where her hair has this big giant reaction of uncomfortableness, and literally through my body getting grotesque and big, and gold streamers being placed off the balcony, and the lights changing, and the sound, it created a scary, eerie moment. And the first 2 shows we did that moment, we had 2, if not more than 1 tiny audience member have to be escorted out because they were too scared. Now, instead of saying, okay, we now need to adjust the age restrictions because that can no longer happen, me as the artist, I was aware of that and who my audience is, I sat down with my director and the other cast members and have literally said, hey, friends, again, this is me, I've worked with kids, so like I can sense things. This moment is scary because I have seen, some kids go out. So clearly, again, something isn't working. we've rehearsed it this way, but now it's not working this way. So instead of being like, well, they're wrong and we're right, I just made sure that I tapered it down. I made sure it was a discovery moment as opposed to a fury moment, and just changed a little bit of what it is. So similar to this Mary Poppins things, maybe it is like, okay, in those scary scenes, what needs to be maybe tweaked a little bit so that you can keep that intensity and that ferocity that maybe you need for the storytelling, but how do you play to all of your audience in a sense that it's not going to push or pressure someone away from their experience? And again, it's that collective communication thing that is like, everybody is coming from different sides and different angles and different opinions. And the only way that, if you want the machine to work, everybody needs to have conversations. You may not always agree. You may not agree by the end of things, but you have to, like, it's a two-way street kind of thing, right? I feel like I'm going back to that throughout this whole
It's good. I think that's a good thesis statement.
I think that's a good thesis statement too.
Yeah. Okay. So let's close up the Mary Poppins bag. Sure. We're in Mary Poppins land right now.
Sure.
I'm wearing Mary Poppins colors, and we're going to sign off this to Editorial. So I will start us off. If you would like to follow my artist Instagram account, you can follow me at Jillian.Robinson96. I have many projects coming on down the line. Newsflash, they're TYA because I love performing for the tinies. So keep your eyes peeled to that performance page if you would like to follow along my journeys. I will be playing Queen Green Pleasant. And it's very important for that character to have articulators, who is like the baddie, the stepmother in Princess and the Pea, a panto. So again, I will be right in the thick of audience disruption because they are literally told to boo me. So stay tuned as to how that goes. Looking forward to it. And then I will be a performer in the show called Pin Pin the Explorer with Twisted Dog Theater is the company for that, where I will be operating puppets. So puppetry is the crux of that. And that is marketed for ages 0 and up. So the show will be tailored towards babies and kids, but anybody is welcome to come. I'm always of the notion too. Honestly, TYA, I think we all can agree, adults sometimes enjoy it more than kids do. I think there's a lot that is definitely a genre of theater where anybody and everybody can come to and get a little something from. So yeah, Mack, where can people keep up and follow you?
Mackenzie Horner, all social media platforms. You can also follow my musical antics over at Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast. We just re-released our Fiddler on the Roof episode in honor of the passing of the great Topol, who was known for playing the role of Tempia. So check that on out.
Amazing. And Ryan?
No point trying to follow me personally, but if you like what I do, follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre, this thing you're watching right at COH Theatre on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, Cup of Hemlock Theatre on YouTube, where you may be watching this with our lovely faces, or follow us on the podcast platforms where you are listening to this without our lovely faces.
Amazing. Perfect sign off. Thank you for sharing the space with me, my friends. As always, opinions were shared. Some were agreed, some were disagreed. Art is subjective. That is the name of the game.
Yeah.
We're talking about it. We're talking about stuff. Like Ryan said, like, share, subscribe, comment, share your voice as well. On that, stay safe, stay warm, stay kind. Cheers, friends, and see you next episode.
See you next episode.